It's September 15th, 2022, and we're ready for yet another exciting meeting of the Montgomery County Planning Board. Starting with some preliminary matters, could I get a motion on adoption of the resolutions, please?
I'll move approval for adoption of the 4 resolutions listed in the agenda.
And I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mary Fishy, aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. How about the minutes from September 8th?
I'll move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Gary Fishy, aye.
Opposed? Those are approved. I don't think we have any record plats, unless I'm mistaken, or regulatory extension requests for a change. So that brings us to Gwen Wright for the Planning Director's Report and photo contest winners.
Thank you. For the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director. Before we get into the photo contest, I wanted to give a quick update on our projects and a little information about what I think was a really successful summer internship program. So first, I do want to tell you that we continue to be working very, very hard on a number of master plans, the Fairland Briggs Cheney plan, and we're gearing up for a great placemaking event for that in October. We also are working hard on the pedestrian master plan and actually had just this week an in-person outreach and engagement meeting here in this building and talked to quite a few people with interesting ideas about the pedestrian plan. We're hoping to get the rustic roads plan to you very soon, and you're going to be getting a briefing on the Takoma Park minor master plan update today. So our work on master plans is continuing. I do want to note that we have some good news, which is that we have an upcoming National Capital Area Chapter Conference that's for the American Planning Association, NCAC-APA, and that's coming up at the end of this month. I believe we've had one session that our staff is going to be presenting at that conference, and we've won 2 awards. The first award, I'm going to be very immodest and announce my own award, which is that I have received a Leadership in Planning Award that was originally created in honor and memory of Fritz Gutheim, who was one of our very early planners and father of the Ag Reserve. And so that leadership in the Gutheim Leadership in Planning Award is going to me this year. So I'm very excited about that. And then the second award, which I'm actually also very excited about, is the, and someone's going to have to remind me of the name of the person it's in honor of, but it is the National Capital Area Chapter APA Award for Engagement and Outreach, and that is for our work on Thrive Montgomery. And so we're very, very excited to be receiving that, and I want to recognize Bridget Breuer, Chris Pfeiffer, all of the folks who worked so hard on our communications plan and who helped implement, all the staff who helped implement that outreach and engagement. So we have a lot of great events coming up. You all know that Makeover Montgomery is happening, and we're very excited to have the incoming president of the National American Planning Association on, it's hard to believe, it's next Thursday. It's only a week away. Thursday the 22nd at the University of Maryland. We're doing this conference with the National Center for Smart Growth. And so everyone is very welcome to that presentation. You do not have to register for the whole conference to attend that. And then on Friday, the 23rd, and Saturday, the 24th, for half a day, the Makeover Montgomery Conference will be happening here in this building. And then again, a week later, we have the National Capital Area Planning Association annual conference, and that is going to be on the 30th, and it will be in the District of Columbia. So lots and lots of great events coming up, lots of things to celebrate, but let's get to some of the actual reports that we have PowerPoints for. So if one of the team could pull up.
Jerry, Sushi,
Yes.
can I just, one question? Congratulations to you, Gwen, and the staff on the 2 awards. But I did receive a printout of semi-annual outline that Casey Anderson is going to introduce. Is there a date set for that? Or where
Yes.
is that to be?
Well, you know, the semi-annual is a report that we do to the council twice a year, and usually in the spring and in the fall. And I believe the current date that is planned, I have to look and see. I believe it's the October 18th. Yeah. So October 18th is the date that's currently scheduled for the county council to hear our semi-annual.
Commissioner Cici?
thank-
Yeah, there's a presentation on it today. It's item 6 on the
Okay.
agenda.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. And again, congratulations on both the awards.
Yeah, we're very
Well
excited.
done,
Thank you.
both you and staff, yeah.
Thank you. So, great. I wanted to start off my PowerPoint by just noting the wonderful, wonderful summer internship program that we have this year. I mean, one of the things that is great about our organization is that we do really look for and have been able to hire incredibly talented staff. And when we brought these summer interns in, if we could go to the next slide, you can see the interns who were specifically for the planning department. Those were all the summer interns for Parks and Planning in the first image, but this is our image for the planning department. You know, we've been very fortunate to have a number of interns who have ended up becoming full-time permanent staff, and some of them in leadership positions. Many people don't know that, Jason Sartori was a summer intern many, many years ago. Carrie Sanders was an intern many, many, many years ago. And we have had great success in finding and becoming acquainted with some really talented people through our internship program. This year, if we could go to the next image, our summer interns worked on a variety of projects in the planning department. They worked on Reforest Montgomery, on HR, recruitment, and training. Particularly, we really got a lot of help in our training efforts. On the Fairland Briggs Cheney Master Plan, on design excellence efforts, on the Great Seneca Plan. They helped us with a lot of GIS work, and they helped us with our Hispanic Heritage Month programming. So if we could go to the next image. One of the things that we really are proud of is that our summer interns not only help us, but we try to introduce them to a lot of different planning ideas and to really, really positive things that are happening in the county. So this is an image from a tour of the United Therapeutics building that was organized for all summer interns, talking about not only the great building and the economic development, but particularly the environmental sustainability of this net zero building. And so they really were able to see a great example. of how to integrate a lot of different ideas into planning, how to integrate, again, economic development, great architecture, and sustainability all in one effort. And I do want to recognize, it takes time and effort to organize all of these events and field trips and activities. So I want to recognize in our department, Robin Brittingham and Modrian Miller, who are our human resources team, and they really worked hard to pull all of this together for our summer internship program. I know there also are very dedicated staff on the parks side, including, I know Darlene Douglas has been very, very active for a number of years with our internship effort. So next slide. Just to finish up, I wanted you to actually see the names of the people who were involved. We had everyone from a James H. Blake High School student to undergraduates at places like Davidson, George Washington, and graduate students in planning at places like University of Maryland, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and even University of Toronto. So very exciting, and Bowie State. Don't want to forget Bowie State, graduate student Lauren Heath from Bowie State. So we're going to do this, I hope, every year. It's a really, really great way to, to build our organization and to talk about all the great things we're doing and to spread the word, because these young people go back to their schools, they go back to their classes, and they're able to talk about what Montgomery County is doing. And so that's really helpful. So next, unless there are any questions, I do want to pivot to the awards.
I just real quickly, I noticed, which I think is great, the variety of schools, both, I saw that there was one from high school, but also universities that we bring in. So I guess the question is, are we out there recruiting, or is it simply because they know what a great agency we are and everybody wants to work for us?
Well, I think it's a combination. One of the things, again, and I want to give kudos to my two deputies, Tanya Stern and Robert Cronenberg, because they have made it an effort to go out and actually do presentations at graduate schools in planning and to try to make sure that we are recruiting both interns and employees from graduate programs around the area. I know that Tanya has been to her alma mater, which is the University of Pennsylvania planning program. I know Robert has been to Morgan State and some more local programs to try to spread the word and help people find our great agency. I mean, one of the things I'm really very, very proud of is the fact that even during the what they called it, the Great Resignation, during the period when a lot of planning agencies are struggling to fill their vacancies, our vacancies, we've had them. People have left for, personal reasons, for better professional opportunities in other locations. We always have some level of turnover, but, we've been averaging maybe 12 vacancies. We have about a 10% vacancy rate, which is actually not bad. And so I think even though the Great Resignation is real, it is something that is happening, we haven't had a lot of people leaving us, and we haven't had as much trouble recruiting great new folks as at least what I've heard from some of my colleagues who have really had some struggles.
Yeah, it's as a as a former Orioles fan, it was always great that they used their farm team. So that's what this reminds me of. When they stopped using their farm team is when I switched to the Nats, but that's okay.
Great. Well,
Are you sure the Nats are on a farm team?
this year, yeah.
Should be somebody's farm team.
So we do have some awards to give out next, and I do want to pivot to that if we can pull up that PowerPoint. Again, I just want to recap for folks. We have been doing this awards program for probably 5 or 6 years, and the photo contest program with staff. And when we really conceived of the whole design excellence initiative, we recognized that our existing staff are incredibly talented. Not only do they have great photographic skills, but they have a great eye for what's important and what helps demonstrate a lot of our design goals in the county. And we wanted to build a collection, a library of great images so that we could use those in presentations, in publications, and we have, over the years, gotten an amazing collection. This year is no exception. The theme was Best Community Landmark. And, you know, a lot of what we've talked about in all of our work is community building, placemaking, giving a sense of place. And those community landmarks are the things that help to do that. So I'm going to just run through the images that were, if we go to the next slide. We had 139 photos submitted, and we came up with 30 finalists and 5 winners. But I will tell you, coming up with the 5 winners was very challenging because all the photos were so good. What we did want to do was show you the finalist photos, all 30 of them, and then we'll announce the 5 winners. And we do have certificates for each of the winners. So hopefully they're here, we'll see. And we can take a quick picture of each of the winners. So let's go to the next slide, please. We're going to just move through the finalists, and there again are 30 images. Remember, the theme was Best Community Landmark, and what we want really to show is not only the interesting subjects that folks decided to photograph, but the quality of the photography as well. Next, please. And as you can see, community landmarks ranged from buildings to nature, and that's really, again, I think an important message. Next. Next. You may notice that, like, the image on the left is not in Montgomery County, it's New York City, but it's still, that is the 9/11 memorial area and the transit station in that area. It's an amazing, amazing building. Next. Next. We loved all of the images with people, you know, because honestly, community landmarks do attract people, which is what makes them really successful. Next. We loved the natural features and the man-made features. Next. Again, the quality of photography in a number of these, the play of light and shadow on the left. I mean, this is really, really professional level photography. Next. Next. And next. I think we have one more. Oh, maybe even more than one more. Let's keep moving through. Okay. So now we have 5 winners, and I'm going to go ahead and call their names and ask Paul Mortensen, who is the person who is the heart and soul of this contest. I want to give kudos to Paul for running this contest every year. He does an amazing job. Let's go ahead and announce the winners and have each of them come up and get their award. First winner is Brian Kent. We really loved this image at National Harbor because it included public art. It included, a man-made element, the Ferris wheel that I think has really become a landmark. But, we really particularly loved the public art focus as a community landmark. When we're done, I think we're going to have everyone come up and take one group picture too. Maybe in the board, members who are here may want to join in on that. Next, Chris Van Alstine. And I guess Chris is not here today, but his supervisor, Patrick Butler, is going to accept on his behalf. And we loved this image because of the movement and the, the sort of excitement of the water and the people clearly, making use of this fountain, and it had a joyousness to it that we were really attracted to. Next, Marilyn Stone. And Marilyn is with the Parks Department, but she is a regular contributor to this photo contest. And this, we thought, was an amazing idea of how nature can become a landmark. And it's a really, really, again, the shape of the photograph, the fact that it's so horizontal, and the benches and gathering space under the tree. It's really very evocative. Next, Atara Margulies. And we loved this image because we absolutely agree that this building has become a community landmark. But we really, really loved the photography here too, and how she composed this image. And then the final is Brian Kent again. Brian is a member of our communications team, and he is a great photographer. We really, really, again, loved the composition, the strength of this image. This is an amazing landmark in DC, but I think we were very impressed with how Brian composed this image to include not only the Martin Luther King Memorial, but the Washington Monument, which you see to the right, and that it was just an incredibly strong image of a very strong community landmark. So with that, if everyone who is interested in being in a photograph, maybe we could come down to the front. We will take a quick photo and then give a final round of applause to everyone who participated. So with that, again, thank you to everyone who participated, and that is the end of my planning director's report for today.
Okay, very good. Unless there are other questions or comments, or heartfelt congratulations, we can move to item 5, the operating budget overview. Is that a different Teams call? Yeah, so I'll All right, we are ready to talk about the semi-annual presentation, which Jerry mentioned earlier, with Gwen and Mike.
I thought we were doing, no, operating budget.
Oh, I'm sorry, operating budget first. Beg your pardon. With John Kroll.
John's like, what?
John Kroll is not ready to
Good
talk about
morning.
the semi-annual. He's going to talk about the budget. Obviously, right, John? Yeah.
That much is true, yes.
Yeah.
Good morning, all. Let me share my screen if I might. And good morning again. This is the next step in the budget process for fiscal year 24. Is a quick overview of what we look like going into 24 and another quick look at our 6-year outlook. Today we'll look at these items here, some key trends, budget outlook for property tax revenue, and some of the internal cost pressures on the expenditure side. And certainly, if you have any questions in the course of this, no need to wait to the end. Just please jump right in. This slide shows the assessable base trends for real property from fiscal year 16 to 23. That's grown by about 22.5% during those years. It's projected to grow by 2.44% in fiscal year 24, and these are based on the March county finance estimates. County council sets the tax rates each year. The rate for each fund cannot be lower than the minimum per the land use article, and that is shown up by the dashed line on the graph. For fiscal year 23, the administration fund rate was increased by 0.16 of a cent to 1.9 cents, and the park fund rate was increased by 0.56 of a cent to 6.12 cents. Preliminary projections require the tax rates to increase in both the administration fund and the park fund for fiscal year 24. Expenditure trend graph is shown here. You'll note in fiscal year 21, it was essentially flat, and that was due to the pandemic-related effects, which resulted in a same service level budget. Modest growth resumed in fiscal year 22 and continued in fiscal year 23. Largest portion of the budget is personnel. The outlook continues to be most heavily impacted by these costs: wage increases, health insurance, retirement, and OPEB. As of March 22, the Montgomery County finance estimates, assessable base again will grow by 2.4%. These estimates in the revenue projected on this graph are based on the following change in tax rates: 0.13 of a cent increase in admin, and 0.53 of a cent increase in the park fund. And that's because we're required to show a balanced budget when we propose our budget. Budget outlook, the internal cost pressures, again, employee compensation is the number one. Health insurance, OPEB, retirement, less so this year, and the operating budget impact for new facilities and debt service for capital construction. Changes in health insurance and other benefit rates are preliminarily estimated to result in an increase of 9.8% in fiscal year 24. And you see in each of these graphs the dollar impact on each of the two funds. For OPEB, we continue to fully fund OPEB per the actuarial valuation. OPEB cost increase is projected to increase by 2.9%. Now, these estimates for this and retirement on the next slide are based on the actual reports for this past year. These estimates will definitely change when the actual report for July 22 is completed, and that will arrive around the 1st of November. This is shown as flat for fiscal year 24. The previous actuarial forecast showed a decrease of about 10%. I've been burned in the past by going with decreases before we see the valuation. So we're projecting at this point a flat retirement cost. We'll see what that turns out to be in November when the next valuation arrives. At this initial stage of budget development, an estimated increase to employee compensation of 9.3 million is included in the projections in salary markers. Figure includes annualization of fiscal year 23's wage adjustments, effects of the reclassification process, and a salary marker for fiscal year 24. The FOP will be in full contract negotiations this year. In fact, we're just now moving toward beginning that. McGeo will have a wage and benefits reopener. We'll budget a compensation dollar marker at the fund level in the proposed budget. Next slide shows operating budget impact of about $650,000 is the initial estimate. And you see on the list on the left, and I'll let you look at these for a second. These are the projects that 650,000 is projected to be needed for to open these improvements.
Mr. Hall, I'm sorry, is there, I don't see anything, is there any operating budget impact for this building? For our Wheaton headquarters, since it's, we're just getting back to using it a lot, and I'm just curious whether we've looked at I see it that all this is parks related. I'm just wondering if there's anything for our headquarters building.
The key answer here is that these are for newly opened facilities or new to be opened facilities in fiscal year 24. The Wheaton headquarters is an existing facility, was opened years back, and that operating expense will show in the budget. I have not yet seen those projections for that, but wouldn't be included here because these are new openings.
And I will note that in our budget that you will be seeing, we do have a built into our base budget is operating expenses for this building, and we do have a sort of CPI kind of increase each year. So that is built into our base budget.
And then the last item on this page is projected debt service based on a new bond issue in fiscal year 24. This chart shows the conglomeration of all the previous slides to show the total cost pressure at this point for each of the two funds, and in a total about 3.2 million for the admin fund, 11.3 million for the park fund. It also includes at next to the last line, major known commitments. We produce a list of major known commitments for Montgomery County offices early on in the process. That was submitted yesterday to the county. We include them here because it's things that have been determined that will be in the base budget as we move forward. The largest external cost pressure for our budget continues to be the Montgomery County government revenue challenges, though we have not heard anything specific this year as to what that forecast might portend. This graph and the next graph show by fund the results of the previous charts and numbers. On the left is a graph comparing the projected property tax revenue and the projected expenditures at this point. Again, these expenditures do not include any improvements to our services. They're just base budget necessities. At this point, it shows that with a small property tax rate increase, we'll be well balanced going forward. We'll see how that works out. On the right, you'll see a projected fund balance, actuals up through fiscal year 23, and then trending down. The key note here is that the note at the bottom of the page, of that $1.6 million shown in fiscal year 24, the reserve amount is $1.2 million. So we're trying to hold the undesignated fund balance in our projections to $400,000 to $500,000. Likewise, on the park fund, you show the current estimate for property tax revenue sufficient to fund the baseline expenditures, and the fund balance of shown at 4.8 million has a reserve amount, required reserve amount of 3.8 million. Again, we're trying to hold the undesignated fund balance at about $1 million. Budget strategy coming forward for this coming year. You note the county balanced fiscal year 23 by using both fund balance and increasing the tax rate, both for the administration and the park fund. Costs continue to grow generally faster than revenues, assuming no property tax rate increase. Preliminary projections show a need for a 0.13 of a cent tax rate increase in fiscal year 24 for the administration fund prior to inclusion of critical needs that the departments may identify. And the same for the park fund, a preliminary need for a 0.53 of a cent tax rate increase, again, prior to inclusion of critical needs that the Department of Parks may identify. Compensation assumptions were presented to the executive committee in a closed session last week, I think. And we'll be proposing, all the departments will be proposing critical needs that are both legally mandated or as necessary for the continuation of our operations. Moving on to the 6-year forecast. This is a summary of the major assumptions that apply to the administration and park funds. Assessable base, fairly flat growth, 2.4 to 2.9, and on out to 2.6%. Again, these are based on Montgomery County finance projections. The wage assumptions include a salary marker in each year. The health benefits in the first couple years are based on our health consultants, and the out years are based on the projections from our OPEB evaluation. OPEB pre-funding and pay-go, again, based on this past year's evaluation. Those are subject to change in November. Retirement, again, I told you I postponed, I held the flat rate increase for pension for 24, and then I slid each of the others succeeding years out 1 year. So as you can see, if they had been backed up, we would have been projecting about a 10% decrease this year. That was, in my estimation, dangerous for the proposed budget. Services and supplies, we're starting to see some inflation, obviously. In fiscal year 24, projecting at this point 5% increase in service costs, 8% in supply costs. And then the current projections are returning back to about a 2% increases in the out years. Then we have some fund-specific assumptions. We have the possibility of CAS office space needs beginning in fiscal year 26. And we have the transfer from the based on planning's needs to the Development Review Special Revenue Fund, continuing for the first 3 years at the $500,000 level, increasing then to $1 million and $1.1 million in 27 through 29. For the park fund, we have OBI showing for operating new facilities, opening new facilities, excuse me, and debt issuance needs going out.
Mr. Kroll, before you, this is Tina Patterson. Could you go back one slide? I'm just curious. Can you explain with the assumption in fiscal year 25 and 26, the drop and then back to 500,000 again? Or, and if I missed it before, just let me know. But I'm just curious to see the decline and then the increase again.
Are you referring to the transfer to development review?
No, I'm
No,
referring
okay.
to the OBI, 650,000, 500,000, 450,000, and then
okay.
back to, okay.
I'm sorry. Those are based on estimates provided by the Parks Department for the opening of new facilities. So I would assume my assumption would be, and I don't have detail going for the out years, is that they're perhaps opening more facilities in fiscal year 24 than they are in 25, or that those facilities, as they're opened, require less operating expenses.
Thanks, Mr. Kroll.
Yeah, Jerry, so you had a previous chart that showed about 11 million, and that was also probably based on the 11 million there. That is based on defer opening of projects, or it not opening something then if does or does not affect the operating budget? That 11 million?
At a loss as to which slide you're referring to.
The one that you had the peak of about, just go back, you had that one there, the 11 million.
This is ending fund balance of each year. And if you'll recall, in fiscal year 21, we were required to institute a substantial savings plan at the request of the county. They then used that fund balance to balance the following year's budget.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know whether that was deferred opening of facilities, so those were not costs in the operating budget and left a surplus. All right, thank you.
No, they insisted that we save money that year so they'd have a better chance of balancing the following year.
Sure, thank you.
Then utilizing those assumptions from the previous slide for our 6-year outlook, and again projecting tax rate changes as necessary to maintain a minimum fund balance above the required reserve levels. That's what these graphs show, property taxes versus total expenditures. Top one is that, the bottom is projected undesignated fund balance. And as you can see, as I noted before, we're trying to hold the undesignated fund balance in the administration fund at somewhere close to $500,000. And a similar chart for the park fund. And again, we're trying to show the ending fund balance undesignated at about $1 million. Timeline for the continued development of this year's budget. This is a budget overview with the planning board. Staff is starting their development of their budget. They'll present in October and November to the planning board. With those presentations in hand, we'll move forward to commission approval of the budget at the commission meeting in December 21st. Budget staff across the commission will work to produce the proposed budget books, submit those to the county executive and county council by January 15th. County executive will make recommendations by March 15th. Then in April, the county council will hold public hearings as they review and review our budgets. County councils will meet jointly to review the expenditures that are attendant upon both sides of the commission. In May, county councils will adopt operating budgets by June 1st, and then the commission will adopt the budget in its entirety on June 21st. The remaining slides, which you have or will have shortly, are just detail of the projections for the 6-year, showing the actual projections in dollars as they filter through and the assumptions that were detailed on previous slides. So unless you'd like me to go through those in any more detail, we're at the end of my presentation and open to any further questions or discussion or direction.
Any questions or comments from the board for Mr. Kroll?
Yes, Mr. Kroll, this is Tina Patterson again. I wanted to ask you regarding when you showed the timeline, is it your intention to return once you've got the actuarial information? Because I know that sometimes can, can impact what you've just shown on these previous slides. And if that's the case, are you intending to come back in November, or are you thinking more December timeline? That's my first question.
Obviously, given the timeline, the updated actuarial forecast will not be available for the first presentation to the planning board in October, but they will be available around the 1st of November, so they'll be factored into the departmental presentations as well as my summary presentation in the November planning board meeting.
Okay, very good. My second question had to do with the revenue challenges. How do you propose, or what would you recommend we do to kind of make sure that our budget takes that into account without knowing whether or not there's really going to be a shortfall or some other scenario? Again, it's an assumption, and it's a little bit of playing with numbers, but I'm curious as to what you suggest.
The best answer I have is essentially a non-answer, unfortunately. We pardon the language, but we play the budget game a bit differently between the two counties. In Prince George's, we have a steady tax rate, and we build up fund balance, and then we burn down fund balance, and we try to maintain steady operating budgets. On the Montgomery side, they treat us as a member of their entire package for tax purposes, and consequently utilize our fund balance, and tax rates change up and down. As you saw from that slide, they do go up and they do go down in years, depending on overall county revenue picture and what's impacting them as well. Because they receive revenue from multiple sources that we do not, but they also have multiple budgetary pressures, such as schools, that impact the overall picture. At this point, we don't know what that picture looks like, and our job primarily is to prepare a budget for our needs based on reasonableness. So at the very least, those who review our budget know what we need, even if they cannot afford it all in a given year. And I'm sorry, that's the best answer I have today.
I'll take it. Thank you. You given me an idea about how to prepare as we review these budgets moving forward. And I don't have any other questions. I look forward to your return when you have the actuarial information. Again, I think it could potentially impact. I'm seeing in other sectors that some of the actuarial numbers are showing more extended life mostly for females, but for males as well. And we'll see how that potentially impacts some of the figures that we've seen on these slides.
Yes.
Jerry Sushi, I have a follow-up question on what you said, the difference between Prince George's County sustaining their budget and us. Got a new council coming on board, new members, different perspective perhaps. Is this something that the chair and commission and with the budget people should take a look at? Is there any potential to, if the condition is more stable in Prince George's, is that something we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the bi-county creation? Is that something that could be looked at or should be looked at? I'll defer to
Jerry,
expertise. So.
Jerry, the reason that Prince George's does it the way they do it is they have different charter limit interpretations. So their fund balance can grow without really they can't really, they don't have any incentive to take our fund balance and use it to pay for other things. In Montgomery County, if we grow the fund balance, then the county council looks at that as money that's available for us, so they can lower our tax rate, increase the tax rate for property taxes for the general fund, and fund other programs. So it's just a difference in the structure.
Yeah, I understand. Whether is there any potential for change of that, but maybe not. I'll defer to you.
We wish, but unfortunately,
Okay.
it's actually identical charter limit language, but it was interpreted differently like 20 years ago, and it's
Okay.
proven impossible to, unwind that.
Got you. All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we will look forward to seeing John Kroll back again in the near future.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
And we will be back in a second to finally talk about semi-annual. We're back and ready to talk about the semi-annual with Gwen and Mike.
Thank you. Mike and I were just talking and remembering who goes first this time, and I think it is planning's turn to go first. I really am interested in some guidance from the board. My thought had been, since this will be my last semi-annual, to focus on, and it will be right after our Makeover Montgomery conference, to sort of focus on, as it says in the outline from 2013 to now, how have we been accomplishing making over Montgomery? And sort of identifying again that theme of best urban, best suburban, best rural, going through and describing in the urban areas both the master plans and some of the implementation that we've done in Bethesda, Silver Spring, White Flint, Grosvenor. In the suburban areas, talking about how we've also done great master plans and implementation. And when I talk about implementation, what I wanted to emphasize are buildings and projects that have actually been constructed or are under construction right now. And so we have images for projects in each of the areas that I'm mentioning that actually are almost, we're seeing how fancy we can get technologically if we can sort of do a 3D model that's sort of before and after of some of these areas. For the suburban areas, it's areas like Rock Spring, Montgomery Village, West Bard, Littonsville, Chevy Chase Lake. And again, in most of those communities, there has been great and positive implementation of the master plans for those areas. In our rural areas, Sandy Spring and Ashton, plus all of our work on agritourism, solar projects, wineries and breweries. I had staff look up in the last 9 years or so, we've had about a dozen new wineries and breweries open in our rural areas, and that is an enormous change. And then emphasizing some of the things that, again, that we have been doing that have helped us accomplish this making over of Montgomery, the zoning code rewrite, our work on Vision Zero with the bicycle and pedestrian plans, the corridor forward plans, the complete street design guidelines, which I think are going to have a dramatic effect as they begin being implemented. Our Design Excellence Initiative, our Reforest Montgomery Initiative, our Equity and Planning Agenda, our Speed to Market and regulatory approvals. And then in Speed to Market, give some of our statistics about timelines, and then move briefly into, again, I was really, in a way, planning on these first topics to be the body of our presentation, and then to move, again, briefly into plans, studies, and projects that are in progress that we're going to be starting, which you can see on the second page, some of the innovative engagement we're using, and then we do have a few schedule updates for plans that are in the work program, our famous bar chart that we would want to show the changes to the schedules for a couple of different projects. We had mentioned to you, and you'll probably be hearing, for example, that the Takoma Park minor master plan amendment is probably going to have a bit of a delay. There's been a lot of change in Takoma Park, and it's been a little hard to engage the city and the Adventist group, who is one of the bigger property owners in that minor master plan. Again, you'll hear more about that later in this meeting, but that plan is probably going to have about a 6-month delay or so. So we'll have to highlight some of those delays. So, but I am interested in hearing from the board about things that you feel it's important for us to focus on. I mean, one thought that we had was, given the conversations about Thrive, should we be talking about that? Should we talk about it, all the implication on our work program? Should we be talking about, in maybe more detail, our equity and planning efforts? What are the things the board would like us to emphasize?
Well, I had a couple of comments on that. So I think given where we're at, not only locally, nationally, on the state side, I think housing is something that we really need to capture as something that not only the statistics around it, but what really struck me last time when you broke down all the different projects that were in the pipeline and the average MPDU units, I think there's still a lot of confusion about what's happening in this county and where we are building housing and how it's happening. And I know the chair is going to be talking about this idea of displacement and disinvestment, but I think that theme should continue. So just looking at my notes here, for instance, the master plan implementation, I think is going to be really important because it kind of shows the story. One of the things that I think you could even mention in here, because it's now been noticed to the public, I think the public meeting is going to be on September 22nd, is the Forest Glen Medical Center site, which is going to have, I think, between 380 and 412 units. That's an unusual site because not only did this council approve the zoning for that site, but it was a site that no one ever imagined would ever work out in terms of the numbers. And so the idea that we're putting housing on sites that currently don't have any kind of there's no displacement happening. It's a large parking lot. It's a medical center that's kind of gone through its end of its cycle. I think that's really important. But I was really struck by the MPDU averages. I think that's going to be very helpful. Also, the economic development element, I think there should be a section of this. I know we've talked about this, but the planning department is really, in many ways, the start of how a lot of economic development happens in this county. And so whether it's showcasing, some of the new headquarters that we have, for instance, the Choice Hotels in Pike and Rose, or any other projects, I think putting that front and center is really important. But the housing element, I think, is something that people really want to hear about, and we need to showcase how we're really working hard to meet our goals. And I think the more you can break that down in terms of projects would be very helpful. Trying to look at my other notes. That's the main stuff for me.
So, just to piggyback on what Vice Chair Verma said, the the economic development, I don't know how easy or difficult this would be, but it would be helpful to talk about when our plans are implemented. The plans themselves are the beginning of the process, and the implementation of those under those that have gotten out of the ground. I don't know whether it's something that our research group can do, is put together kind of what the value added to the county has been in economic development for those projects. And it's not just and I think we should talk about it, economic development, not just as the fiscal impact, but also the housing ties into that because it actually brings more housing for those businesses and essentially could attract more. But if we have numbers that can show implementing our master plans has brought this much additional, whether it's tax base or indirect income or revenues into the county, I think that would be really helpful.
We might not be able to do that for everything, but we might be able to select one master plan and talk about it for that, whether it would be Bethesda or Chevy Chase Lake or something like that, where we could talk about, Chevy Chase Lake occurs to me because there's a discrete number of development projects. It's not hundreds of development projects. There's a discrete number of them, and we could, I'm looking at our team, we could look at, trying to pull some numbers on what the actual land values have been, what the, tax increases have been, that kind of thing.
That'd be great as a model. I'm sorry.
I just had a suggestion along those lines, which I think is consistent with what Gwen's saying. I think in order to limit the scope, do like one building or a small group of buildings. Like I was kind of thinking the Elm or one of the really, trophy class buildings in Bethesda, but it could be Chevy Chase Lake. It doesn't really matter. And to sort of go through what's the property tax revenue from that building and to connect that to the cost of services. So, and the number of school children, for example, because I think we're about to get back into some of that discussion next year with the new council because some of them were not around for all the GIP discussion. And I just noticed during this last primary election, some of the council members who are the I guess you'd say putative council member elects are, kind of receptive to these arguments that, oh, well, I'm for housing, but we got to worry about infrastructure. So only if we can make sure that it pays for the infrastructure, only if the infrastructure is in place. So I think you could kind of get ahead of this with something along the lines of what you and Carol were just talking about by taking a building and saying, all right, a building like the Elm or even one of those multifamily buildings in Chevy Chase Lakes has X number of units, it generates Y amount of property tax revenue. About half, even more than half of that property tax revenue is going straight to MCPS. So to emphasize the idea that, this debate about like impact fees is kind of really, over the long run, not even particularly material. It's the fact that a building, a really expensive, market rate building throws off a ton of tax revenue that subsidizes everything else that happens, and it doesn't generate a lot of cost in terms of particularly schools, but also things like transportation because it's right next to metro. Vehicle miles traveled are relatively low, and it's very efficient to serve. So if you took one building or just a very small number of buildings and kind of spun that out a little bit, I think that might be easier to get your arms around, particularly in the time we have available, but also in terms of explaining it, as opposed to trying to, do like all of Bethesda or, an entire master plan. And it might kind of be helpful at making an argument that leads to things down the road.
Yeah, I think that's great. Because what I'm looking actually for future, as we move into the future, is to have a clear understanding of what economic development impact we have, both from the planning perspective, but from development review. And it becomes actually a celebration of what we do that will then be a more positive result. And I think that might lead into a clear understanding of where we're going and that, what we contribute, the value that we add. And that's always what we're trying to, to make sure that they understand, meaning the council.
And this has also been a good year for biotech, and in terms of especially how quickly our staff has really put forth a lot of these projects. I think that's also something you may want to consider kind of putting as a separate line item of just dedicating to it, because we are doing so much there and we're slowly getting higher in the ranks nationally. So I think that's something that is really important. And it's also important to highlight this stuff because when you do have an ask for more planners, you can justify it by the amount of projects you're doing. So I think connecting the two, it should be part of your narrative. Even though you're showcasing what you're doing, I think this is also a good time to just kind of hint and say, look, we're doing all this work, but we're going to need additional support based off of just what we're seeing in the queue and what we've done in the past.
Jerry, since you have a couple comments, if I may. I had a chance to speak to Gwen the other day, yesterday. Next Wednesday, I'm on the Racial Equity Social Justice Committee, and on the agenda is the county executive speaking about the Thrive 2050. And I just see that as a kind of a wrap-up document that brings everything together that the other commissioners have talked about. And I understand Gwen's going to send me an email or has sent me an email about some of the comments we made. Again, we have some new members coming on the council, perhaps some different perspectives. But I think that kind of brings it all together. A couple other things that Gwen, maybe you didn't totally cover, but our efforts on obviously historic preservation in some cases. And the other thing that the chair said about the infrastructure, we have an effort looking at additional transit operations in the county that we're taking a look at. And then the other thing that has come up, the ability of something like WSSC to meet the requirements in some of the more urban areas like Silver Spring. So again, if there are any comments or retort on the comments on the Thrive 2050, I think that would be very important to emphasize those and how it brings everything together. And that's all I have at the moment.
Director Wright, I did have a couple of suggestions, and thank you for asking the question. I like the idea of the best urban, suburban, and rural. I echo what Vice Chair said regarding the economic development component. It's something that we are having more discussions about, and we're seeing other regions talking about what economic development means, but not just in terms of the tax incentive, but they're really talking about what's the benefit. And I'm hoping that in your presentation, you can talk about the connection with economic development and community benefit. Many of the things that you have on the list, there is a community benefit. And I want to ask if you would highlight this predictive analysis, because every council member has received commentary from their constituents regarding the walkability or ability to get from one part of the county to another, whether it's via public transportation or crossing a particular street or streets. But I also wanted to, I think your talk regarding the speed to market, but again, that connection from economic development to community benefit. And we see this also with the Farrell and Briggs Cheney. I've mentioned this project before, and I think it's important when we talk with the council to show them that this is a repeatable process that, again, is about the community benefit, but also there's that economic development component that that is present. We're not necessarily teasing it out, but it is there. That's all my comments at this time.
So thank you. That's great feedback, and we will look at how to integrate those themes that you all have emphasized. I think they're excellent themes, and we'll look at how to integrate that in to the presentation and still leave time for Mike to talk about parks. That's always the trick.
Well, before you turn to Mike, I thought this was Embrace Immodesty Day for Gwen. So, this is Gwen's last semi-annual. So, I think it shouldn't just be a subtext. It is the, explicit message that this is a recap of the things that this council and Gwen have, and all of us together, but it is all about Gwen this time, to really highlight the achievements of her tenure as the planning director. We should not be modest about that. She should not be modest about that. She should embrace the praise that she has earned for a job well done over a period of many years under some very trying, challenging, complicated circumstances.
Make sure you bring your award
Yeah.
with you so you can show it off.
Especially the Public Engagement Award for Thrive.
Mike.
Okay, it's time to switch to parks, and you've got my outline. I think we have a good list of things to talk to the council about that are pretty good and impressive, but I welcome your feedback and thoughts on these items and others. So my plan is to start with two really, really good plans that the planning board has approved and just highlight the key recommendations of those plans. The Pros plan, of course, with the active urban and social theme while still preserving and protecting our environment. And then the Wheaton Regional Park master plan, things like highlights like improved access to the park and pedestrian and bike access through the park, and the very exciting adventure park that we contemplate there. So I think those are two really good plans we'll brief the council on. And then I talk to you almost every week about our really robust park activation program. Just as an example, tonight we have two concurrent events going on. We have Yappy Hour at Elm Street Park in Bethesda, and we have Salsa Night at Long Branch Arliss Park going on at the same time. So these are just a listing of some of the things that are going on, but we'll have a slide or two that just makes it abundantly clear that we are being successful with our program to get lots of happy people socializing and engaging in our parks. One of the things I'm going to mention to the council on this theme, and this fits other topics too, is we have really moved the Parks Department forward with resources that the council always provides at the last minute through the reconciliation process. And the budget, the staff that run these programs, this team really has all come throughout this process. So I just want to highlight the success of this program and message to the council that when you give us resources for things we say we're going to do, we actually do them. And this living proof that there's events going on almost every evening and weekend throughout the summer. I'll just give a shout out for the Friendship Picnic. That's coming up this Sunday. The weather's predicted to be great. That's at Wheaton Regional Park, and we expect well over 1,000 people to come, and we're certainly getting a lot of love for our upcoming Rocky Horror Picture Show. People think that is a great idea. So it's really fun coming up with these new themes and events, and people, as they say, if you build it or if you program it, they will come. We also, number 4, project delivery timeline. These are just some of the projects that will appear on it, but we do a graphic every year that shows projects that have come on the ground in the past and projects that are going to come online in the future for about a year. And it's always an impressive way to show that we're getting things done throughout our capital program and getting new parks and renovated parks on the ground. Item 5, similar theme. We have a level of effort program called Park Refreshers, where we go into older parks and renew them, and we just will give a listing of what's coming up and what's been done through the refresher program, projects like Edith Throckmorton that are done, and projects like Carolyn Freeland in Bethesda that are in a design phase and going to be under construction soon. Item 6 is we always talk about our seeking of funds outside the Montgomery County tax base, and we'll highlight what grants we are seeking and what we've received. On trails, we'll highlight our Trail Ambassador program that our pilot program that we held that was very, very successful, and the upcoming opening this fall of the very awesome Fairland Skills Bike Park that we got a state grant for. We will talk about South Silver Spring Park, the building we bought down there, and our efforts to demo that building and at least get a temporary park in place in lightning fast time between acquisition and when we'll have people gathering there. And in the creative outreach category related to number 8, we actually have our community meeting to talk about that, the vision for that park at Denizens next week, which is right across the street from it, which I think will bring in a lot of people. You all know about our Long Branch initiative. We're in a very massive outreach phase, and it's great. I'm getting a lot of feedback from different people that they really like what we're doing here in terms of outreach and engaging the community and their vision for what they want to see in these Long Branch parks. I stopped at the Long Branch Festival at Flower Ave Park last Saturday, it was just a beautiful vision. As soon as I walked in, the park was at capacity. There was music. Our staff had a table there to promote the Long Branch Initiative, and I just watched people actually engaging with the park staff throughout the afternoon because of the way they invited with the graphics and the the stuff they had that people just kept coming over. So stay tuned for that. On item 10, we'll talk about what we've done with our small but mighty program access team. We had an event with a mural dedication at Wheaton Regional Park that was designed by a young man on the autism spectrum. We had 5 council members show up for that dedication. It was a great event. And highlight also the growth in our Montgomery Explorers program, which is a walking program for citizens age 50 or better, and that continues to grow. Moving on to athletic fields, just again, real hard examples of progress of things we're doing. We're renovating 2 fields at Blair High School. It's under construction. And this is great because there were 2 spaces at Blair High School, which is in such a prime location, between the Beltway and Colesville Road and University, that had space for fields and games, but the school board was not maintaining them in a way that they could be used that way. So we're going to go in and renovate them, and it'll be a win-win because the students at the high school have more and better space for practices. And then in the evenings and weekends when the school isn't using them, we will permit those spaces to leagues, which has been the quest we've been on for more than 20 years to both increase the capacity and quality of athletic fields in the county for our many, many adult and youth sports leagues. Number 12, we will brag about the Enterprise Fund and Division and how they have proactively navigated their way through the pandemic. The fund is healthy, the fund balance is healthy, and it is no small feat, and hats off to Christy Turnbull and our Enterprise Division for being very creative about ways to keep revenue coming in while cutting expenditures throughout the pandemic and making sure that fund emerged healthy, which it did. And then winding down, we'll talk to them about park visitation data pre and post-COVID. We're using a whole bunch of different mechanisms to count people, electronic counters, streetlight data, a host of things we've been focusing on to know whether where and when people are visiting our parks and how many. And then lastly, we'll talk about our volunteer program. The number of volunteers is always growing, and highlight some of the things that have happened, including the reality that we not only donate food from our excess food from our community gardens at the end of each fall, but we're actually now growing food specifically to donate to food programs at our Pope Farm Nursery. So that's my list, and I welcome any feedback.
I have 2 comments. Number 1, I just want to give a shout out on the program access, and I think that's great. I had your staff gave me a wonderful presentation on that, and I think it's a great highlight for the council to know what we're doing in that regard, and that would tie in one of my pet projects, which is the Wheaton Stables, as part of that. So that's number 1. And the other thing I want, which I thought we did before, which I thought was very effective, was to have a map to show equity focus areas, and then to make sure that we're continuing to underscore where that the activation that we're doing, the projects that we're doing in parks are really spread out, and we are continuing, because this isn't a beginning and ending. This is something that we're going to have to continue to demonstrate, is that we are looking at equity focus areas to make sure that our services that we provide through the parks continues to enhance those areas and the service for people that live in those areas, and that we're always thinking about how to deal with the equity and implement those activities in this county. So
Yeah, that's great feedback. We will do that. We've looked at different ways to highlight, but we'll figure out a way to make those jump out. And when we do that exercise, both with capital projects and programs, the data shows really good results. Just for example, tonight, program in Bethesda, program in Long Branch.
I think this is a great list, and I'm sure you have everything in here. I didn't see the chair's initiative with regards to the mountain bike program. Is that going to be showcased here as well? I didn't see that on the list.
We probably can cover that under the trails.
Okay. Yeah, that was just such a nice visual too, to kind of show the kind of outreach and kind of work we're doing with the community.
Yeah, on that note, by the way, since you brought it up, that was so well received. And I think the council loves it. They will love to hear about it. I'm really hoping that we will have, we have a lot of vacancies still. And so just like last year was going to be not just year-end money, but I guess you'd say probably some mid-year money. And I'd just started kind of poking at this a little bit and seeing if we could get, if we do have some resources available, as we look at it at mid-year, to buy a bunch of bikes, because that's something we can hold on to them. We don't have to get rid of them all at once. But while we have an opportunity where there may be some laps to work with, and to really, I think there's some issues to be worked out with how this program can be sustained from the point of view of staffing. We'll do it, but it's challenging to figure out how you're going to, it's pretty staff intensive to run. But in the meantime, while we're sort of scaling it up, I think it would be great to buy bikes in some quantity, both because we get a better deal and also we may not have an opportunity again to make a big purchase of bikes, and we could store them at Green Farm or whatever while we. So I'm hoping that the rest of the board will just support that direction to the Parks Department to be looking for opportunities to make a significant bike purchase sometime this year in the event those kind of that money is available.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely worth funding. And just to piggyback on what Commissioner Rubin said in terms of equity, I think giving younger people the opportunity to do something that they otherwise wouldn't have because of the finances that's associated with it is huge. So I think capturing that in that realm, I think, is really important, and and showcasing, or maybe giving a preview to what the chair just mentioned about how we like to expand it, I think is a good opportunity. I think this is like really nice if we can use these opportunities to not only show what we've been successful in and like also what we want to do in the future, so they know that it's coming, and we're doing a good job. We're using our resources in a positive manner. Definitely, since you and I were the VIP guests for that event, the Holy Festival was so unusual. It was one of the largest crowds. The economic impact, going back to what we talked about, I think is something you should talk about. How these park projects are actually affecting local economy, how they're giving local vendors opportunities that they never had before. I think you should be capturing it in that way. And this was a different event for this group because it was an exclusive event that they never had before. And showcasing how many people were there and the fact that there were no issues, there were no fights or brawls or trash. These are the kind of things that I think allow the Parks Department to have more flexibility going forward, and even taking it to the next level. But I think the economic development part of it is our parks are so incredible that people are moving here just for it. I mean, you met someone recently, last night, who moved from Colorado to Kensington, who was saying that these are the best parks he's ever seen in the country. And we are in that regard. So I think showcasing that is really important. Of course, the volunteer programs are great, and I always love to see the weed warriors because it seems like it's not that of an important thing to do, but like the fact that we have all these invasive vines and the way they take over our local ecosystems, I think showcasing that is incredible. Our volunteer program is really the backbone of so much what we do in the Parks Department as well. So I think showcasing that would be great. But otherwise, you always get the best slides because once you do the before and after of all the fields, it's game over. Everyone's just like ooh and ah for like 30 minutes. So whoever decides to go first this year, it's if it's the Parks Department, Gwen, then you'll have always a lot to make up for. Is it your turn?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Gwen's year.
I-
There's no debate.
I just wanted to add one other comment, and I don't know how you could do this, but one of the things that I'm going to be that I, would look for is the importance of the coordination between the parks and the planning departments. So if we could talk about that a little bit as maybe the transition from Gwen, from your presentation to Mike's presentation, in a way that talks about, why, as an agency, we're a park and planning commission, and that how the two are interfaced and interplay, and the importance of that. And it doesn't have to be anything long. It can just be just a way of transitioning. But I think I would like to see that start to get into the, really, when people think of us and our agency, they think of us as, because we work together so well, and how important it is that we were set up as, an agency dealing with both.
I love that idea, and I think I'll very easily be able to use a few examples of how coordinated we were at the beginning of a planning process and how quickly we got some things that the plan recommended on the ground. But I think that's a great point.
Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we can move to the Takoma Park minor master plan update. Okay, we're back for the Takoma Park Minor Master Plan update with Ms. Williams and Ms. Stam.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Melissa Williams, and I am the project lead for the Takoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment. I am here this morning to present an update on the Takoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment, including a briefing on the Community Engagement Update Report, plan partnerships, and the next steps, including the fall 2022 visioning efforts. I'm joined by Lauren Stam, Larissa Clevin, the Master Plan Supervisor, and Elsa Heisel McCoy, our Down County Chief. Today's agenda includes the following. We'll provide an update from our partners. We'll also discuss the key takeaways from our outreach efforts, providing a visioning overview and next steps and an updated plan timeline. The City of Takoma Park serves as our primary partner in this planning effort, and we hold weekly meetings to discuss the plan and the process. In addition to this planning effort, the city has also undertaken analysis of their public spaces and Maple Avenue, parts of which are located within the plan area. Staff will incorporate findings from these studies into this plan where applicable. Additional partners also include the Washington Adventist Hospital and other large property owners, including the Montgomery Housing Partnership. The planning team holds regular monthly meetings with Washington Adventist, where we are briefed by their development team on the status of the Washington Adventist Hospital site and university. Staff also meets with other stakeholders, including residents, civics, other community organizations, and county agencies. Although the plan area has a range of community assets, including high-density affordable housing, stakeholders expressed a desire for additional public amenities and other improvements. These desires are noted in the Community Engagement Update Report. Staff will incorporate their responses along with information received from other stakeholders, including property owners, local businesses, and the City of Takoma Park, into our visioning efforts so that we might answer these three questions. These questions are: what is the future of Maple Avenue and the surrounding area? What is the future of the Washington Adventist campus and surrounding area? And how can this plan build on community assets that would improve the quality of life in the plan area? And now I'll turn it over to Lauren Stam, where she'll discuss our community engagement efforts.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Lauren Stam from Down County for the record. We began engagement for this plan last September. After hearing from over 550 community members and stakeholders, we took all the information we heard and summarized it in an interim report to share with you as well as the community. This report reflects all of the comments we collected through our partnership with Everyday Canvassing, our online survey, as well as conversations with individual community members during our outreach and meetings with community groups. Each comment or response collected was coded to help us determine what issues were most important to the community. First, I'll share the main takeaways from that work, which reflect what we heard most frequently over the past year of engagement. Residents really enjoy living in Takoma Park and appreciate its walkability, safety, proximity to DC, Silver Spring, Sligo Creek, and small businesses. Community members lamented the loss of the Washington Adventist Hospital and want to see a health clinic or urgent care facility remain on this site. Community members see Sligo Creek Stream Valley Park as an important asset to the community and want to make sure it's protected through better stormwater management and environmentally sensitive design, especially on the Washington Adventist campus. Though there were diverse views on scale, compatibility, and type, community members would like more housing, especially housing that is affordable, to be a part of the future development of the Washington Adventist campus. In addition to housing, community members would also like to see more walkable retail options, particularly a grocery store. Community members would also like to see more resources for the community incorporated into the redevelopment of the Washington Adventist campus. Most often mentioned were a community gathering space, a park, a gym or fitness center, and a swimming pool. Before we get into the more specific comments from our various engagement efforts, I want to share with you the demographics of the study area, which is a little larger than the plan area, as you can see on the map to the left. The study area is predominantly Black or African American and also has a large percentage of white residents. Last spring, we partnered with Everyday Canvassing to canvass all of the multifamily residential buildings along Maple and Lee Avenues within the plan area. They were able to interview 39 residents and provide interpretation into several languages, including French, Amharic, and Spanish. The majority of those interviewed self-identified as African. The second most represented group was African American, followed by Latinx, and many chose not to respond to the question. You'll notice that the racial and ethnic categories on this slide are different from the last. Everyday canvassing was able to collect much more nuanced racial and ethnic information than we are able to gather through the census, so that's the reason for that inconsistency.
Can we just stop here for a second?
Sure.
This table is really important. It showcases the diversity of our engagement process, and I think you should definitely be showcasing this. Gwen, this might also be a good slide for your semi-annual. But we often get criticism, and rightfully so, that most of the participants that are, often giving feedback do not represent the demographics of the study area. And this is one of the few times where it's actually pretty close. Am I missing something? I mean, this is a little bit unusual.
No, I think you're spot on. We put a lot of effort into making sure that we reach the population that represents the people that are living in the study area.
Yeah, so this is a big deal. So I definitely want to just stop here for a moment and just recognize that. Please continue.
Thank you. So from this effort, we heard that Maple Avenue is generally a safe, quiet place to live, and many of those interviewed called it a good community, although some did mention concerns about thefts, break-ins, and drug use. Residents are pleased with the quality of the schools, but are in need of additional resources for the community, including childcare, easier access to government assistance, health care, exercise equipment, and classes for computer literacy and English literacy. Some residents reported satisfaction with the transportation service in the area, especially walkability, although a few mentioned that the bus service schedule is limiting and should have more direct connections to places of interest, such as downtown Silver Spring. Overwhelmingly, residents expressed a need for a grocery store on the Washington Adventist campus, as there is not one within walking distance. Residents would also be interested in seeing a new community center or gathering space, a recreation center, a playground, and more housing. Residents also reported some issues with the maintenance and security of the apartment buildings. Everyday Canvassing also canvassed the Washington Adventist University campus to hear directly from students and faculty. The majority of those interviewed identified as African American. The second most represented group was Latinx, followed by West Central African and white, and many chose not to respond. They shared with us that the campus's existing facilities are aging, in bad condition, and require upgrades, in particular the dormitories. Students mentioned that they would like to see more social activities and events on campus, as well as spaces to socialize. They also want to see new food options or restaurants near the campus or on the campus, as well as entertainment options. Students also reported they do not feel connected to the surrounding community, and many said they don't spend time in the area aside from their classes and often frequent downtown Silver Spring instead. Throughout all of our outreach efforts, we also encouraged everyone we met to fill out our online questionnaire, and it was very successful with 239 responses. The majority of those who responded to the questionnaire identified as white. Here's what we heard from the questionnaire. Residents are passionate about Takoma Park's walkability, trees, diversity, local businesses, green spaces and parks, small town feel, public transit, liberal and progressive values, proximity to DC, Silver Spring, and Sligo Creek. When asked about what needs improvement, residents focused on the underutilized land that's currently on the Washington Adventist campus, the amount of impervious surface, the campus's aging facilities, the need for more housing in the area, issues with runoff into Sligo Creek, as well as concerns about pedestrian safety and connectivity. When asked about what should be preserved on the Washington Adventist campus, most residents responded that the open green spaces should remain, especially Sledding Hill, as it's known to the community, along with the trees in Sligo Creek Park. Some residents also said that nothing should be preserved. When asked about what should happen on the campus in the future, overwhelmingly, residents said they would like to see more housing on the campus, especially housing that is affordable. Residents also mentioned mixed-use development and the addition of retail or restaurants. We also heard from several residents that they would like to see a new high school in Takoma Park, and this was a possible site. When asked to share concerns about the future of the campus, residents mentioned increased traffic as well as tension in the community over the development. Residents are also concerned that the campus will be overdeveloped or, on the other hand, further deteriorate if no development takes place.
So I had a question about this slide because this is interesting,
Yes.
just given the demographics that responded here. Here you have 81% white or Caucasian responding. How did you deliver the online questionnaire? Was it done through email? Was it a URL that was posted? And was there any outreach that was associated with that?
Yes, so this was a survey that was a link on our website. We traditionally use SurveyMonkey, which we use for this questionnaire, and we really encouraged everyone we encountered at farmers markets and other events that we attended to fill out the questionnaire.
Right. So I think it's important to note that we were instructing people to utilize a QR code. So there was signage that was translated into all of the applicable languages, and there was the QR code that was present. And we would instruct them, if they didn't have time to speak with us today, that they could follow up signing up for our e-letter, or also using this QR code that would take them to the survey. And it was my experience just in participating in all of the engagement and outreach efforts that there were, let me back up. We had 2 farmers markets that we attended, and I will say that that a lot of these responses came from the Takoma Park Farmers Market, and so that's the primary market for Takoma Park, and then we attended a secondary market at the Crossroads Farmers Market. And so my experience in doing both of those activities is that there were many people at the Takoma Park Farmers Market that took the QR code and our information and said they would do it at home. And when we were at the Crossroads Farmers Market, we were actually able to talk to people when they approached us, and in many cases, they gave us their comments right then and there, and they didn't necessarily take the materials with them and didn't want to use the QR code. So I think we're kind of seeing the balance of people that may have been more comfortable with technology and doing it at home, and then people that were more comfortable with having that conversation with us. And even when we went with everyday canvassing, we knocked on the door and we talked to people. They were also given the opportunity to utilize the QR code to complete the survey as well. And we still ended up with this balance.
Well, that's really, really helpful, and I think we should just hold on to this stuff because this is going to inform how we continue our public participation process, and it's just another data point, right? So this is why it's important to do the in-person canvas, online, and I think you might be right. There's some potential technological gap. I saw maybe Commissioner Sichi had a comment.
Yeah, I did. I guess you beat me to the question. If I look at page 8 and then I look at page 13, the 2 charts, maybe a little hard to discern the colors, but if I'm correct, Caucasian white was 81% and Asian Pacific was 3%. But when you look at the chart, the 2, and so does that suggest any way? I know you mentioned some attempts to get additional information, but seems to me bringing the chart together consistent with the population would be a good way to get responses of what should be done in the community.
Well, and I do want to note, this is why we're doing multiple methodologies for outreach. I think the traditional online response to a questionnaire or a survey doesn't always get to underrepresented communities and people of color. But if you could go back a slide and just again remind folks that in this, where we actually are doing canvassing, you're talking to the same number of residents as who submitted survey forms or questionnaires, but you have 45% African, 15% African American, the 9% Latinx. I mean, you're getting much higher numbers of people of color. And I think what that is showing us is it's legitimate to use multiple methodologies, but the methodologies that seem to be working best for reaching these typically underrepresented groups is the actual personal knocking on the door and face-to-face conversation. And that is, I think, a great lesson learned both from the Silver Spring Plan, which had a lot of these same kinds of outreach efforts, and this Takoma Park plan. So I do want to just, again, remind you all, when you look at the questionnaire, that's one methodology and it's achieving one kind of outreach, but we're also doing these other kinds, and we have exactly the same number of people who were interviewed here as who submitted forms in the survey.
Gwen, I think that's a good point. I guess there has been a degree of intimidation while they don't really care what we think. And I think if you broaden it and really go to the community and get that input, I think you will get some, I think your approach is good to get in there and get it to the community so that you have a better representation of comments and input from how the community shows up on a population basis. So good point. So.
Thank you. And I'll just add one final note that, we were deliberate in representing the information this way and wanting to show what we learned from each effort, because I think it is important to note, what certain groups of people and which groups are more represented think about this project. So we were very deliberate in wanting to do that because we know that these are not all equal. We're not hearing from the same groups of people in each medium that we're doing engagement.
This is Tina Patterson. I did have one additional question, and I'm looking at page 9 in the actual the engagement report where you mentioned having an interpreter with you, and I can understand, and I agree with you regarding sometimes the divide regarding the use of technology. Was the survey available in languages other than English? Is my first question. And then my second question has to do with, and I saw some of the photos, was there an opportunity for those who were interested, maybe in addition to the QR code, did someone have an opportunity to fill in the survey on the spot, or was it primarily the QR code?
I'll take the last question first. So there was no opportunity to complete the survey in real time with us. We were instructing them to go to use the QR code to go to the online option. But we were asking the same questions. So the questions that we asked remain the same. And so we were instructing people that didn't have time to participate in kind of the face-to-face activity, that one option was for them to use the QR code to go to our survey. And so we did make accommodations on our site where people could actually translate the survey into the appropriate languages. And we used, I believe there was like the Google widget that allows them to kind of press the button to translate it into another language. So that was the mechanism that we used. And we did understand that it was an additional step that people would have to take, because when they opened up the survey, it would open up in English, and then they would have to go through another maneuver in order to translate it into the appropriate language. But we tried to explain that to people when they were present, that this is how it worked. And for those that needed assistance with kind of getting to the survey, we did that as well for the people that needed assistance.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. So I will pick up back where we left off. So throughout all of our outreach efforts, we encouraged everyone we met to fill out our online questionnaire, and it was very successful with 239 responses. The majority of those who responded, I'm sorry, did we already do this?
You did that part already.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out where I left off. I think we were a little bit deeper into this. So when asked about what should be, wait, did we read this entire thing?
As well.
Where did I leave off?
You stopped at
Oh,
the
we
last
were at the,
bullet. Yeah,
okay.
last bullet.
I'm so sorry.
Look.
When asked to share concerns about the future of the campus, residents mentioned increased traffic as well as tension in the community over development. Residents were also concerned that the campus will be overdeveloped or further deterioration will occur if no development takes place. I think we may have actually been right here. Okay. In addition to these efforts, we heard from many community members through our outreach at farmers markets just outside the plan area, at National Night Out, at our own retail pop-ups where we set up tables in the plan's commercial areas, and at meetings with community and neighborhood groups. More detail about these efforts are included in the report, and now I'll hand it back to Melissa to discuss how we'll be moving into our next stage of engagement for the plan.
Thank you. So our next stage will be the visioning phase. Our visioning efforts will focus on the potential futures for the plan area, and our primary event will be the open house scheduled for October 18th. This will take place at the Piney Branch Elementary School inside their cafeteria from 7 to 9 p.m. There will be boards and exhibits explaining planning terminology, the planning process, and also providing opportunities for feedback. As stated earlier, we plan to utilize the key takeaways noted in the Community Engagement Update Report as our organizing method. We will also make sure to provide, we will also provide live interpretation services upon request, and this will also be available online on demand after the completion of the open house. And so now we'll talk about the update to the plan timeline. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the county's primary elections, ongoing city initiatives, and other happenings necessitated additional time to complete the existing conditions and engagement work. This included meeting with stakeholders and other landowners. As a result, the proposed schedule needed to incorporate an additional 7 months into the planned timeline. We've discussed this with our plan partner, the City of Takoma Park. We actually presented this to them last night, and we've also discussed this with our other major stakeholders. Staff proposes the following update to the plan schedule, and you can see that it adds an additional 7 months. And so right now you can see that we're in fall 2022 to winter 2023, and that's the visioning and preliminary recommendations phase. And so that completes our presentation. If you have any additional comments or questions?
I have one specifically about the Washington Venice campus, and it may not have been appropriate for today's discussion, but because people are talking about what they see there, what they want there, what's the connectivity? I'm not that familiar with that campus because it was always a hospital, and when we refer to it as a campus. And when I think of a campus, I think of a campus as more like an island, an exclusive. Yes. So my question is, I think it's really, or my comment is, I think it's really important to address the connectivity, both pedestrian and vehicular, including buses, the bus systems that people have talked about, the routes, to make sure that whatever it is that we end up recommending for that area, that everybody can access it. And I think it's because it could be a big community asset. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a little bit off from a locational standpoint from the main town center of Takoma Park. So I think we would really need to focus on some of those access issues.
Thank you. That's actually a part of what we plan to do in our visioning. One of our visioning exercises is a connectivity, kind of a mobility exercise where we're going to look at kind of the potential future of making the campus more accessible, making it more open. And I think it's also important to note that it's not just the hospital site. We're actually working with the Washington Adventist University as well, and they are also they're planning for a new future for themselves also.
I'm glad to hear that you're coordinating directly with the school, because I think that's an important asset, and it needs to become kind of a fabric of in the community, and it may not be looked at that way, but I think that's really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
I had just a general comment / question. So interesting, looking at table 4 on page 32, housing was mentioned the most, 81 times, which I don't think would have been the case. There is a demographic shift happening in Takoma Park now, and also people are more aware of the fact that we need more housing. Question, I know there hasn't been any, correct me if I'm wrong, new development in Takoma Park on the Montgomery County side since what, the 80s? Is that a correct statement? Multifamily housing. How does rent control fit into this? development not really possible in these sites. I know I'm kind of addressing something that's, elephant in the room, but, we can vision and we can plan, but, we were just having a conversation about implementation. Can you really do anything if there are such strict controls? And I think this is an important conversation to have for this plan, because we are going to be gearing up for this conversation from the county council potentially. And so as we do the work on this plan and see what the ramifications are for a incredible site that has so much potential, how do we connect those two ideas in a real world example? I think it's going to be really important, not only for the county council to see, but also to the community to recognize that even though this may have been a policy that they thought was going to bring about equity, it may have actually had the opposite effect. Sounds like, Elsa, you want to say something?
Well, so you have correctly identified one of the elephants in the room, and we have had conversations, I think, from the beginning of this plan about how the city's rent stabilization policy is going to impact the results of this plan. And so we've been talking with DHCA in terms of how the MPDU program interfaces with that. And so that is something that we have been talking about and will continue to talk about. And yeah, so we have been talking about it. No answers yet.
Okay,
Stay tuned.
great. Just wanted to put it out there for the record.
Jerry, since you have another question, if I may, and that is if you look at the map, figure 10, and you show the boundaries. I recall once there was a vote, people in this area along New Hampshire, whether you wanted to be in Montgomery or Prince George's, and the choice was to be in Montgomery County. In terms of the surveys, you show the planned boundary area, and then the red line is the totality of, I guess, Takoma Park, the city boundary. Your interviews were distributed throughout the red boundary, or were they focused a little bit in the plan area? That was one question. And then the other question, in terms of the Adventist site, somewhat abandoned, I guess there's some residual facilities, but is that a potential site for job generation in terms of more commercial or business, and looking at jobs for the area, as opposed to the Adventist staying there and expanding the area, moving up 29?
Okay.
Two questions. Yeah.
Yes. So I will take the first question, and I think I'll lob the second question back to Elsa. The first question, when we did the canvassing or the interviewing, those were actually very defined. They're along Maple Avenue. That's essentially where all of the high-density housing is located. So that's all of your apartment buildings and your condominiums. We actually use the canvassing service to door knock along Maple Avenue and along Lee Avenue. So I don't want to leave Lee Avenue out of this as well. We knocked on all of those doors. Those were the people that got the direct interviews. And then we also utilized that same service specifically for the Washington Adventist University campus. And so we worked closely with students there. We actually had the student body president that was a part of the process, and they assisted us with interviewing the students. We did not utilize that service in the broader part of the plan. We actually went back to more typical outreach, because that's your single-family communities and also your small businesses. We actually reached out to the civics and the HOAs and the tenants associations, and we also sent out emails and other things to reach out to people that were not located either on the campus or specifically in one of those apartments or condominiums along Maple or Lee.
Okay, you had touched on like transportation access, walking, transit access. And so in terms of the site there, the hospital site, is there looking at job generation, a job potential generated?
Sure. So I can take that, Elsa Heisel McCoy, for the record. The So the campus now is home to the Washington Adventist University, which employs teachers and administrators. On the hospital side, I think there is still some residual medical services being provided there under agreement with the state. There's also a medical office building that's a condominium, office condominium that is expected to remain. And I think at this point, though, the Adventist healthcare team, sort of looking at the campus, is looking at a variety of options. I think, if job generation were to be market feasible, I think that's something that would generally be desirable. So that's one of the options. The market, particularly now, is a little uncertain for developments that aren't sort of single-family homes. So I think we're definitely interested. They're definitely interested, and that'll be one of the options that we'll be exploring as we move forward.
Good. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that.
This is Tina Patterson. I just wanted to, Vice Chair mentioned earlier, he didn't think that there had been any projects in this area. We did have it was a multi-family dwelling unit that was built along Maple Avenue in the high, again, as Ms. Williams indicated, this is a high density area. So there hasn't been any type of retail development, but there has been some housing development. And I want to encourage to the presenters as we're moving forward, and I think you're going to do it, although it wasn't specifically called out or teased out, that the groups that you mentioned, I think, are going to be helpful as allies as you move to the next phase of the visioning. Because this is a community with a mix of the high density dwelling units as well as single family homes, I think engaging and encouraging the participation of those other groups will encourage people to come in and weigh in and give you some of the answers that you're looking for moving forward. It's interesting. Years ago, I actually lived on Maple Avenue, and it was over 20 plus years ago, and not much has changed in this community in terms of the layout and the mix of dwelling. But when there is opportunity, the residents of this community are engaged, and a lot of it has to do with working with a trusted partner. And I think you're doing that. I would just encourage you to continue doing that moving forward.
Thanks. And again, Elza, the Maple Avenue has been fortunate for MHP and others to spend money to reinvest in some of those buildings. There hasn't been new construction on Maple Avenue in some time, or development projects. I think anything other than single family, I think it's been 25 years citywide. But I think MHP, there's the development. They own 5 buildings, and they've reskinned some buildings and are working on rehabbing. But in terms of new from the ground construction, I think you're right. It's basically stayed the same since you were there.
Jerry
you.
Cichy, if I recall correctly, there was the issue of state highway and layover unloading trucks versus driveway or access site improvement. Is that still pending? I believe that was on Maple Avenue. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, that's a completely different part of Takoma Park. That's
all right,
in
thank you.
Takoma Junction, completely different
Yeah.
area.
Great, thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Is that Tacoma Junction area where that project was, that's in the plan area or not?
It's not in the plan area.
No.
No,
okay.
again, if you look at the map of the plan area, it's a very constrained area
Yeah.
close to City Hall. That property that is at Takoma Junction is in a completely different part of Takoma Park and is not within this plan area.
And I'll just add that Maple Avenue is owned by the city of Takoma Park. Maple Avenue is owned by the city of Takoma Park.
You're saying Maple Avenue is maintained, the actual street
Yes.
is
The
maintained
actual street.
by the city of Takoma Park.
Thank you for
Yes.
clarifying.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we'll be back in a minute for our last item which is item 8, a ZTA, an SRA, and a bill. And it's time to talk about item 8, ZTA 2210, SRA 2201, and Bill 2422, which are all about streets and roads. And I think Jason Sartori wants to say something to kick it off.
And we're getting it.
Yes. Thank you. For the record, Jason Sartori, Chief of Countywide Planning and Policy. And Greetings from beautiful Lake George, New York. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. I'm here on leave for my sister-in-law's wedding, but I did want to join virtually to quickly introduce this item. What you have before you now is a package of bills that will codify the Complete Streets Design Guide. And as you know, the Planning Board adopted the guide in February 2021, and the Planning Department and MCDOT have been using the guide in our review of development applications and in the preparation of master plans ever since. In addition to creating context-sensitive design guidelines and standards, the guide also established new street and area type classifications that create that context. And the 3 bills before you today will formally document these new classifications and translations into from the old classifications into chapters 49, 50, and 59 of County Code. This is not the first time you've seen the ZTA or the SRA. They were both introduced by the council at the board's request. I think we brought them through the board in March of this year. But this will be the first time that you've had the opportunity to provide your feedback on the edits to Chapter 49, the road code. So one thing I think that will be obvious today is the collaborative nature of this effort. We've talked a great deal in the past about how we coordinated this work hand in hand with MCDOT and also DPS. And I've been really impressed with how well our teams have worked together. And I'm really grateful for the dedication that Steve Aldrich as our project manager and Dave Anspacher, who led the project before him, have really demonstrated hand in hand again with the leadership of Andrew Bossi at MCDOT. Now, collaboration does not necessarily mean that there is always complete agreement. So I think you'll also see some examples today of disagreement over some finer details. And that's okay. We can work through those and share our different thoughts with you and with the council and continue to move forward. But I think you'll also see another kind of unique feature of this today is the collaboration internally here at the Planning Department, as you have 2 people presented to you who have presented to you fairly frequently. First, Ben Berbert, who you know is our zoning guru, and then also Steve, who led up this project. So I'm going to hand it off to Ben and let him then introduce the topics and then have him hand it off to Steve. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for that introduction. More dedication than me because he still signs on when he's on leave. Just kidding. So I am Ben Berbert with Countywide Planning Policy Division. And before you today is our overview and analysis and recommendations for Bill 2422, CTA 2210, and SRA 2201. We're going to take it a little bit out of order of what's in the staff report and kind of knock out what I think are the easier 2 conversations first, which is the SRA and the ZTA, in large part because you have seen them before. We do have some minor tweaks we want to make to them, but I don't think anything too substantial. And then I will transition the conversation over to Steve Aldrich and our friends with DOT to talk about Chapter 49's changes. Next slide, please. So just as a basic background, staff is here supporting the ZTA, SRA, and bill. Again, the SRA and ZTA we're kind of referencing as minor corrections, kind of phrasing it as modifications to Bill 2422. But as Jason said, these still are pretty minor and technical in nature, but I think we are going to spend a little more time talking about those corrections today. Next slide. So again, some of this background is a little redundant. We've been working with DOT for quite a while on this Complete Streets Design Guide, and we are kind of finally nearing the end of this process. As Jason said, this will identify new street types as well as new area types. This was first sort of approved as a design guide in 2021 by the Planning Board. We're basically now here before you with the technical changes that need to happen to the 3 chapters of County Code that will actually implement this design guide. For the sake of not wanting to keep repeating information, I'll go ahead and skip to the next slide. So Bill 2422 was introduced by the Council President on July 26, 2022, technically on behalf of the County Executive, but really on behalf of MCDOT. On that same date, the ZTA and SRA were introduced by the Council President by request of the Planning Board. And as Jason said, back on March 31st of 2022 is when we had the hearing here to actually transmit the requested ZTA and SRA to the Council. The ZTA is probably the most technical update of all three of these documents. We are really going through the zoning ordinance to find every reference to existing road typologies as they are found in the current version of Chapter 49. And we're trying to replace them with the new typologies that were in the Complete Streets Design Guide and that are going to be now the new road typologies in the new version of Chapter 49. The changes are throughout the code, although most of them really fall within the development standards section, which is Division 3, where it talks about the way the different uses kind of interact with each other in the code. When thinking about the SRA, there's a little more technical part of this. There are some technical aspects to road engineering and design standards that are kind of buried in the technical review subsection of Chapter 50, specifically Section 4.3.E, which is the road section. And there you'll find information on intersection spacing, including new discussions that we're having about protected intersections, as well as some other standards about cul-de-sacs and some turning radii and centerline radii of roads. Next slide. So I'm going to now continue in and discuss first the SRA and the ZTA. Again, the SRA is making modifications to Chapter 50 to make sure that we're consistent with the new Complete Streets Design Guide typologies, as well as a few technical updates to some of those tables and standards. Go to the next slide. There's a couple of minor modifications we want to make to the SRA from how you first saw it back in March of this year. One of the first, and as you can kind of see in the red line here, we've realized through some correspondence we received, it wasn't entirely clear what protected intersections maybe are. They aren't really clearly defined in Chapter 50 or 59 currently. We actually felt the best place to define that was through Chapter 49 of the county code. And so we are just kind of amending the section we've added discussing the placement and inclusion of these protected intersections to say that the definition would be found in Chapter 49. I would say if for some reason that does not get added to Chapter 49, we do think we would want to amend this section to then reflect what protected intersections are, because we do think it is important to define them somewhere. The other change that we're recommending to the SRA is very minor. In the subsection talking about when private roads are allowed, the draft SRA had an and for connecting the A and B about the classification of the road and the length of the cul-de-sac, and we sort of realized that really wants to be an or and not an and so that's reflected on the screen here. Moving on to the ZTA, again, this is a very technical update, really just replacing road typology names from one to the other. So go ahead to the next slide. The main changes we want to make here are actually in the defined terms section of the code. When we first defined sort of road, we kind of just looked at the different road types that were defined under the current section of Chapter 59 and tried to make the translation into a new definition. We've realized it didn't really make sense because it left out certain road typologies that probably just, if we're going to include some, why not include them all? It made no sense not to include them all. And so this is just an updated definition that actually reflects all of the new road typologies under the definition of road. The other thing we're proposing here is actually to create a definition for street. It seems a little silly, but the word street's used a lot in the zoning ordinance and it's never defined. And so it just makes sense. We have this for other terms that are used a lot that kind of mean the same thing as something else, where we'll just reference where else to find the definition. And so just for clarity, and again, this was something that was brought to our attention by other people that helped us review this once it was introduced, we just wanted to define street as the definition of road so that there's no future confusion. The other thing that we just want to kind of make note of, and I do know that our friends with the council staff are making note of this as well, there have been a few ZTAs that have been adopted in the last few months that have relied in part on road typology as setting part of the use parameter. Two ZTAs that come to mind include 2202, the density and height for biohealth, as well as 2206, the exemptions for historic resources. Both of these were adopted relying on arterial or higher type roadways as being a defining part of where the use can be. And we just want to make sure that since that's now been changed since March of 2022, that those sections also have the proper typology switched over. There may be others that are not coming to mind, and so rather than showing a technical update to each of those, we just want to flag to the council to make sure that no recent ZTAs have inadvertently added more language than what we anticipated. We did receive a racial equity and social justice statement for ZTA 2210, and it in part referenced a RESJ statement that it also did for Bill 2422. The summary for both is that there is little to no expected RESJ impact for the county. The ZTA itself is very highly technical. The RESJ for the ZTA did reference a discussion for the RESJ done for Bill 2422 that basically said that the impacts are sort of indeterminate and based that statement on not being able to determine when or how or why roads may get upgraded to follow the new standards, if any of them, are actually ever upgraded. I think a lot of the anticipation we have is just sort of going forward as major road projects are done or redevelopments are done, these new standards will be applied. I think the OLO was sort of taking the view of if there's ever any proactive decision to upgrade roads, until we have an idea of which ones they are, how they're chosen, and how they're funded, they can't make any determination on whether it's going to be equitable or not in that process. And so that's sort of the reason for their vague statement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to discuss our analysis of Bill 2422.
Great. For the record, Steve Aldridge from Countywide Planning and Policy. And joining us today from Montgomery County DOT is Tim Couples, who is the Acting Deputy Director for Transportation Policy, and Andrew Bossy, Transportation Engineer, Transportation Planner, and Jack of all trades. And so they're going to be here, and I believe they're certainly willing to speak to some of the comments that we have addressed in our staff report. So, as introduced, the bill, which was developed by Montgomery County DOT, and actually DOT staff was they shared some of this stuff with planning staff as it was under development. So it was, as Jason said, a very collaborative process. So there weren't many surprises on this bill. So in addition to what's in this Bill 2422, there's the intention that DOT will be submitting new executive regulations for Chapter 49 ComCore, which will occur at some point after the approval of Bill 2422. How soon, not quite sure, but that certainly is the intention to add some of the more technical details from the Complete Streets Design Guideline, things like minimum widths and default widths, to put that into code. So the guideline has some backing from the county code. The bill provides quite a number of changes in different sections of Chapter 49, including the standards and specifications section, which is a great change to really incorporate not just AASHTO as additional guidelines, but NACTO standards as well. So that's a great addition. Section 4922 revises some pedestrian, sidewalk, bicycles, and wheelchair information to have new terminology, including the term side path, which is something that for master plans we're now using in the planning department, and this would make it, I guess, more standard within our county code in general. In addition, they also provided a fee in lieu option for construction of bicycles and sidewalks under certain conditions. And I will say that part of this bill, the major intent of this bill was to make it conform to Complete Streets, but because that's an opportunity to revise the county code, there are other elements that the Department of Transportation has included to basically streamline their process and to make things more clear.
I'm sorry, is that like consistent with the policy that was passed by the planning board recently with regard to fee in lieu payments for frontage?
Well, we're going to have to go through that.
Okay.
Yeah. The traffic calming section 4930 has essentially been updated to conform to the new street types. I think that is, and I think there's a lot more flexibility in the complete streets design guidance on whether certain streets can have traffic calming. And so this is the first step in getting us there. In addition, Section 4931 has provide road classifications. This is really the classifications that are in the Complete Streets Guide, that they will replace the ones that are currently in the Master Plan of Highways in the current road code. And there are a bunch of different subsections, including translations and some other things in there. Planning staff, we see this as a necessary interim step until we can actually do a technical update to the Master Plan of Highways. And this gives us, for an interim period, a way to move towards the new system. We think we can get at least 95% there with these interim translations. Fifth, revised design standards for roads in Section 4932, including some elements, including minimum rights of way for some of the proposed street types, revised curb radius guidelines consistent with guidance in the CSGG, and maximum target speeds for all street types. And the remaining changes are, as I mentioned, the update references to street types, as well as modifications, as I said, deemed necessary by MCDOT and DPS as well. So in terms of the classification, I just sort of want to talk through, we've identified a three-phase approach for the full translation of the Master Plan of Highways. The first one is the approval of this bill with the recommended changes that we have in our staff report to establish the interim street classifications. We then are planning, as part of the pedestrian master plan, to identify new or modified area types that are introduced in this bill 2422. And then finally, when we can add it to the department's work program, we would conduct a technical update to the Master Plan of Highways and Transitways to fully adopt the street designations and to really look very carefully at, some of the more nuanced areas, because this translation isn't going to fit every condition. There are going to be streets that have specific, adjacency issues and traffic issues that really needs to be studied at a master planning process. And so that would be, the intent would be to get us from the 95% to complete translation. So what we've identified in the staff report are a total of 10 what we call major issues and about 10 minor issues. And I'm going to focus primarily on the major issues, and I will have the minor issues up at the end on the screen, which we certainly can go through if you folks have questions. So issue one was to identify the area types. And I think this one really just, the first part of this is that the area types sort of need the same level of treatment as the street types. And so adding the language shown in red in this section sort of gives that sort of the full weight. The second bullet was to designate 3 additional downtown areas based on the visions identified in some of the more recent master plans, including the White Oak Science Gateway, Great Seneca Science Corridor Master Plan, and the 2017 Rock Spring Sector Plan. So those areas would become downtowns, and I think that typically, in the bill, the downtowns are specified, and if an urban area, the translation basically is an urban area that is not a downtown becomes a town center. And after coordinating internally and certainly talking with the master plan supervisors and particularly, in the Mid-County area where these master plans are, it was really seen that the master plan vision in all three of those plans were that these areas were to become downtown areas. I will show examples of this. So the FDA area, including Viva White Oak. To the right, you can see the LSC area, which would, the downtown areas would include all except, I believe, LSC South. So not the green area, but the areas above it. And then finally, the Rock Spring master plan boundary, that would become a downtown as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask, would you like DOT's comment as we go along, or wait till the end and come back through these?
What's the question?
Would you, we have a number of comments on these issues. Would you like to hear it as we go along, or wait till the end?
We might as well hear it as you go along.
All right. So if you could back up one slide, please,
Yep.
Steve. Or, okay, two more.
There.
slides. The first bullet, that's fine. The second bullet, just want to ask, the three areas proposing to be added out at, in White Oak, Great Seneca, and Rock Spring. Just want to ask, are they really downtowns, or are they more like town centers? I think that our interpretation of the plan implies it's more of a town center sort of shape, and where I think Great Seneca might be headed is in a similar direction. The big difference is really in the active zone, and it's the width of the sidewalks, the width of the frontage zone, which sounds great to have bigger sidewalks, but of course there's a cost associated with that, as well as the impervious pavement impacts and right-of-way needs. So if we go with downtown, you're going to be adding about, I think it's about 10 or 15 feet-ish. I mean, there's some flexibility, of course, in that, to what the minimum rights-of-way might need and what the impervious pavements would be.
I'm not sure I understand your point here. Are you saying that we should be more conservative in defining where the limits of the urban street types are, or?
It's really just, are these downtowns or are they town centers? The bullet here proposes to put them under downtowns. It's not a make or break for us, but we suggest it be town centers.
I think some of that might have to do with what the expectation is for pedestrian, how much pedestrian activity there will be, because the downtown area, clearly you want wider sidewalks, particularly CBDs, things where people are going to be walking a lot. So I think it depends on that question. Are we anticipating in those three areas a significant amount of pedestrian activity on a regular basis? Because if that's how we're dictating it, so I guess that's the question that I would have.
It seems like if we're just talking about those three areas, that's a little bit different than if the part in the previous paragraph that just says prospectively, I guess. And maybe some of this is retrospective in the way the master plans talk about these areas. You'd have an opportunity to make a decision based on a specific place, right? But as far as those three, I thought we were trying to make these as walkable and, having urban qualities of, street design as we can. And I guess, and I also kind of question the premise that it means there's more imperviousness, because, like take Rock Spring, you got a lot of overbuilt roads there right now. I think you can get a lot of these road code-ish elements in the right-of-way without adding more pavement. In fact, you might have a net reduction in pavement. So I just think that I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I'm not sure I'm persuaded that the premise of your point is
Basically, if you take the
correct.
same street, so if you reconstruct whatever street's out there today under a downtown versus a town center, let's say, sure, maybe they're both 8 lanes today and they go down to 4 or 6. But the big difference between downtown and town center is downtown's going to have, I think it's 10 to 15 foot sidewalks or side paths, whereas town center is 8 to 10 feet. So that's an extra like 5-ish feet of pavement, comparing equally between these two different types.
Right.
I'm not saying bad to have wider sidewalks, but it's just that extra impacts of imperviousness if you don't have the pedestrians to really need that extra pavement.
I think downtowns also have frontage zones.
And the frontage zone as well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I sort of think you should err on the side of accommodating more, because in the real world, you probably won't get everything that's specified, but you're not going to get more that's specified in the standard. I mean, in my experience, that's the way the world works, right? There's 10-foot standard for multi-use paths, and often we see plans that are proposed for approval that are 8 feet. And you ask why, and you say, well, we wanted to reduce imperviousness. Well, if you don't establish a more aggressive standard, you'll never get the standard at all. You'll get less. So my position is we should keep it.
Okay. And I did want to note that item, I guess, the identification of the Rock Spring Master Plan boundary was incorrectly, there was some misspelling there, so we're going to make some corrections to that when we transmit it.
Okay. If anybody disagrees with me, feel free to interrupt. But I think we should try to work through this as quickly as we can.
Yeah, Jerry Sushi, the point in these new areas that are being developed, you're looking at more transit, you're carpooling, biking, et cetera. So there might be an element to ensure that you have adequate, more people perhaps are walking than normally. Again, if you're pushing biking, transit, carpooling, et cetera. So that would be one consideration. As areas become semi-downtown, yes, they're not totally downtown, but if you're going to have facilities, restaurants, other things there, people, maybe walking between where they're working and trying to get to a store, restaurant, or something, hotel even that might be in the area.
Yeah, sure.
So, to me, that's a consideration.
Yeah, right. I sure wish somebody had assumed more pedestrian traffic in Wheaton, because the sidewalks are grossly inadequate now. And I'm sure when the streets were designed, it probably seemed ample. So, what's next?
Okay. Next one, the third bullet would be to add industrial as the fifth area type. There are only 4 now, and there are industrial streets, and so, just so that we have it established within Chapter 49, as we go forward, we felt it was appropriate to have an industrial area type. So we're proposing some language changes, and we essentially are defining industrial areas as areas where employment and industrial uses are the predominant activities. And
So we agree adding in a definition. We might wordsmith it a little bit to read, to quote, an industrial area is an area with predominantly industrial zoning, end quote. It's simple. It avoids some of the vagueness in the phrasing that's right there, that is in the staff packet. And it ties it to phrasing that's used elsewhere, referencing Chapter 59's zoning.
I wonder if we could add some clarification that, in industrial districts, it seems to me that there is an increasingly diverse range of land uses. Like if you talk about like Brookville Road, for example, in Littonsville, you'll see restaurants, or you'll see, a bakery that has a wholesale operation, but they also sell, out the front, they sell retail, and in the future, hopefully there would be some residential. So perhaps just some acknowledgement that particularly in industrial areas, the, design of, streets and sidewalks and whatnot should reflect that nuance, that it's probably.
I think the guides kind of captured that as well, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the main concern, actually. It's behind what we are proposing is tying it to the zoning, because the uses and employment, that can vary a lot of what that is. Is that retail spot industrial use or not? But if it's on the zoning, it's clear.
Yeah,
And I would actually say planning staff concurs. We're agreeable to that change.
great. Moving right along.
Legacy, issue 2 was to remove legacy area types from the county code, specifically the definitions of rural area, and defining it based on old areas and then urban areas as well. And we had a bunch of different ones to really try to, strip it out of the code as much as possible. And I know that you folks have comments on that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we need to do is retain the federal classification system as well. It's important to us when we're going for grants and other sorts of federal and state aid. We still need to be able to fill out these forms with the classification. And that's really what drove us to keep the rural and the definitions as they were, as far as rural and urban. It's about being consistent with the federal classification system. I think for our purposes, day in and day out, we're going to use the Complete Streets Design Guide and the street typology, and we just need to have this overlay system for the federal stuff.
Yeah, fine, okay. I think that's unobjectionable. But if somebody objects, please let me know. As I
Okay.
say, I'm.
All right, issue 3.
Oh, yes, we'll get to Leslie. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten you.
Issue 3 is interim translations for arterials, minor arterials, and business district streets. One of the things that we found when we were reviewing Bill 2422 is we actually created an ArcGIS map where we conducted the translations and looked at how complete is it. And when we looked at these 3 street types, and especially I would say for business district streets, we found that there was a lot of disconnect because there are many places where we've done master plans where we've designated a business district street, generally in an urban area, but sometimes we designate it spilling outside that urban area. And with the translation, the street type that would result is just not appropriate. So we provided a lot of detail, looking very carefully at what are those streets that don't seem to make sense from the translation as written. And we really discovered that looking more at the number of lanes and whether the road is divided or undivided made a difference. And so we provided a lot of different changes, 11, 10, and 11 for each of these 3 street types. And admittedly, some of these translations actually don't happen, but we put them in for completeness. But some of them are pretty significant. And on the business district side, I will mention Howard Avenue in Kensington is one example. It's classified as a business district street all the way out to Knowles. Actually, in the future, that might become an industrial street. But right now, it's a business district street, and it would become I believe, a boulevard with the translation. And with our revised changes, it would become an area connector, which we feel is more appropriate. So it's like a page and a half of edits from us, but we think that it really adds some completeness to make sure that we're as close to 100% as we possibly can with these translations.
Okay,
and that we avoid having to, haggle it out and try to deviate from these generic translations. Andrew, Tim?
Yep.
Yep.
I agree with the issues that we're trying to address. There is a clause that's in the same section, we'll actually get to in a few slides, that allows an override where those default conversions don't make sense. The concern with what's been included in the staff packet here is basically it's overcomplicating, and by doing the undivided and divided breakdown, it opens up the door to other questions about what that means. Is it divided or undivided today or in the master plans, or what constitutes a divided road? Is it geometric median? Is it flex post? Is it just a striped out lane in the middle? And this is a point where it's just really simplification is better, and we have another option to try and override where we don't think that it makes sense.
And I guess the counterpoint is that master plans actually designate roads as divided, and if they're not divided, they're undivided. So that's what we'd fall back for. I mean, on a road that's classified, the nomenclature is 4D, that's a 4-lane divided road. So it's pretty clear in the master plan, whether that's exactly what's in the plan, that's what's designated as the master plan.
I think I'm finding myself agreeing with Commissioner Bossi on this one. Anybody else? I mean, it just seems like there are some complexities in the real world, not just what the master plan says, but what it is today and what that means.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
If I could just real quickly, Jason Sartori, Chief of Countywide Planning, just kind of clarify here too that anything that is not captured in these interim translations would need to be captured in our ultimate translation, which would occur in a technical update to the Master Plan of Highways and Transitways, which we don't currently have on our work program. It's something that we're hoping that we can add to our work program for FY24. And so at that point, though, there would be a more detailed, street by street adjustment to all of the classifications. And so this was an attempt by planning staff to try to preempt those so that the interim translations could be more accurate to what we will ultimately be recommending, most likely through the master plan of highways and transitways update.
Well,
Sounds like a phased approach.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Well, I was just suggest if you wanted to tweak it and be specific about, to address some of the points DOT's making, I think that's fine. But I think they're just making a good point that it's a little unclear. Are we talking about what's there today? What'll be there, assuming some ultimate condition or what? And, what exactly does it mean to say it's divided? But if there's some other approach, I don't know that any of us.
Well,
Jerry Sishi, haven't been in this general area. I know things have changed, but we always met progress meetings on projects, road projects. We always met monthly with Park and Planning. There was always someone in our progress meeting, but there are going to be exceptions, some unique place. So I think it's collaboration. If it doesn't quite meet the standard that has been set, it's collaboration between MCDOT, the planning staff, and in some cases, obviously, State Highway, to come up with a suitable solution, which then may generate some need to change the standard. But on occasion, there may be 3 or 4 exceptions in the county, and I think that's a.
Jerry, I think you muted yourself.
Okay, kind of lost my comment, but I don't know if you heard it. It's sometimes you can't cover everything. You need collaboration between MCDOT and the planning staff. Might be some unique cases from time to time.
Okay, I think we can move along.
Issue 4 is interim translations for primary residential streets in the country area. And we think this was just an error, just, because it's inconsistent with what's in the Complete Streets Design Guide. Right now, it's listed as primary residential streets in a country area are classified as country connectors. And yet, if you read the guide, the intention was that they be country roads. So we're just recommending that change.
Okay, fine.
No comments. Issue 5, transitions between street types on continuous roads. And this was, I think, a really good idea when we started talking about it. This is something that we do on master plans all the time, certainly within planning staff and sort of an agreement between us and DOT and Glen Orland and county staff. But what we realized when we read it and started to try to apply it is that, this is really a master plan effort, making this decision. And that, by and large, the boundaries that we're going to create, they're very finite. You get into a town center or downtown, it transitions pretty quickly. There may be a few places where we need to transition it through an intersection, which may be inside or outside. But I think those kind of decisions in terms of cross sections, that happens all the time. We think this is an overly complicated, and in some cases will add a transition to a road section that the master plan had a transition master planned in, and so it will be an additional transition. So we think it's kind of redundant and not necessary. So we're recommending that this section just not deleted and not be included.
I felt really smart writing this, but I agree. It can go.
Nods all around.
Issue 6, the authority to modify interim street type designations. Here we have a pretty huge difference of opinion. We're recommending that planning board be the appropriate authority in consultation with DOT for determining when to deviate from interim street types. The bill is currently written, has DOT as the appropriate authority to do that. So we're trying to shift the focus, but also do it in consultation with DOT. And Andrew, Tim?
Yes. So we don't recommend that this be included toward council. Under the authority already established under 4931A, that's doing master plans, functional plans, sector plans, the planning board already has that authority to be able to override and create those classifications. This is something where this is trying to for us, as we're doing a design project or something, to interpret the context and apply the appropriate design standards where the default conversions don't make sense. It's intended really just for those design purposes, where projects might be proceeding in an area where the master plan hasn't been updated to reflect complete streets. I would suggest one edit, though, to what we have in the text that currently before council, is just where it says "or transition length." That can come out because the previous slide kicked out transitions. But again, otherwise, this is trying to be a stopgap until you do come through with some sort of more formal master plan, sector plan, functional plan amendment to establish the classification.
And I guess my counterpoint to that would be that if the board wants to consider the item as listed, I would say a compromise would be to add, after the Department of Transportation, just say in consultation with the planning board.
Well, I don't mean we need to get all turfy here, but I think we do have, this is our wheelhouse. I mean, it just is. We're the transportation planners, you're the transportation implementers, we're the sort of policymaking body. We're the keeper of the master plan of highways, et cetera. So I just think and plus, as you point out, there's other statutory authority for it that gives it to us. So I think it kind of creates some confusion if you say in one place it's DOT is effectively the lead, and the other place you said it's the planning board. But having said that, I'm confident that we will all hold hands and it'll be unicorns and rainbows, because it always is. Well, at least it is now. It wasn't always, but I just think we're going to be fine. We can all get along.
Yeah, jury session, when I was there, I viewed we were trying to implement what was planned, and from that standpoint, we would try to accommodate as much as possible. In some cases, we had quick take that State Highway and WSSC did not have, so sometimes we would actually get a little bit of extra right-of-way in our project and the cost of our project to then make that right-of-way available to State Highway or WSSC. In some cases, we would even get a developer. We would use quick take to get a right-of-way between intersections, so a developer came in to do his project, where we say, oh, by the way, see if you can pave the sidewalk, we've got the right-of-way. And we would, in getting the right-of-way, if a wall or bush was needed for the property owner, George Mossberger was my right-of-way guy. I'd say, let's work with the property owner to kind of do a complete street, major project coming in, access to both intersections, east, west, or north or south of the project. So, was my view, try to implement what was planned. Obviously, there should be a give and take. And sometimes you do modify the plan based on comments from MCDOT.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be, we should keep the planning part of it with planning.
Okay, moving right along.
Issue 7, minimum rights of way. And this was added, there were probably a bunch of reasons that maybe DOT can talk to, but I know that there are some streets that are not master planned that the planning board may require a developer to construct. And for those type of streets, it's useful to have minimum rights of way. Currently, for our current design streets, those are specified in the DOT's design standards, which DOT, I believe, may be updating once we're through this process. But this specifically added some specific minimums for those type of streets, like downtown streets and town center streets, et cetera. And the definition, we had a little bit of disagreement on the definition, and part of it was because 2 words were left out, which we can talk about. But we wanted to make it clear that, when we do master plans, we always have to specify, that the master plan rights of ways are minimum and what's included and what's not. And, regardless of what's in Chapter 49, we're always going to do that in each master plan. We're not always consistent with what we say, and we need to get better at that. But things like transit stations and intersection widening, those aren't in the minimum rights of way. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Yes. First, the 2 missing words are the words "do not" as we're saying what is in a minimum rights of way, and that whole list of things in there. That whole list are things that are not in the minimum rights of way. Very important missing words. So that has to get corrected one way or another. Speaking to the edits on the screen here, obviously I'm speaking because we like our phrasing better. The definition that we have for Chapter 49 tries to park it. It's a definition for Chapter 49, and there's other parts within this minimum rights of way section that are based on that. And our concern with the staff edits here is that it's kind of outsourcing that definition to other documents by saying that that's where those documents will define what's in the minimum rights of way. They can clarify that, but master plans have kind of been a little bit over the place with how they define minimum rights of way and what isn't in there. This would be your starting default definition that works for the code, and master plans can also use it. I think they're trying to say the same thing. It's just a matter of our text keeps it in the code, and the draft text before you tries to shift it into master plans.
I think because it says such as, these are lists of examples of things that could be included, and I think that each of these are very important, and it's going to be relevant to the particular project, and I think that it actually helps to have those examples in there so that there's no concern about what we could add in there. So I like the proposed change.
The proposed
I do
change.
think there needs to be some recognition of the fact that, as Mr. Bossi says, sometimes the master plans are kind of all over the map and are, they vary a lot in terms of their specificity. And, this language seems to imply that the most recent plan governs. I think probably only if the plan is more recent than this code, because in cases where the plan is 30 years old and doesn't include some of these road code, new school road code-ish concepts, the point of this code is to kind of drag the plan's right-of-way recommendations into the 21st century, right? So I agree with you on the, what you said about such as, but.
Let the record reflect he's pointing to me.
To Carol, that's right. But I think the earlier part of this sentence is kind of the problem, that it doesn't reflect Andrew Bossi's comment, which is important, that we got to reconcile the fact that we've got all these documents that were written over a period of time. Some of them won't be updated because there's nothing going on for land use reasons, but we need to have the code apply to effectively revise some of those standards, right?
Yeah, I have a suggestion for the do not, and it occurs basically between end and account for parking. And so their rewrite for that section would be and do not account for parking. I think we would prefer if it said and do not generally account for parking.
Okay, whatever, but I think we're all fine with that, but I'm just saying let's change it so to make it clear what trumps what. The plans with a capital P, all their flavors, are really come first if they postdate the code. But the code also has to be able to update outdated right-of-way recommendations in the plans. Now, if you're talking about which plan among plans takes precedence, it should be the most recent one. So if you could maybe tweak that to reflect that idea.
Yep.
Great. What's next?
Issue 8, curb radius. So there was a lot of discussion in the Complete Streets Design Guidelines about minimum curb radii, and so the bill has included most of that, but there were some discrepancies. So planning staff added some suggested revisions that would make the guide and the bill much more consistent. Andrew.
Yep, I agree with one small edit. I do think what you've drafted is more sensical than what I first wrote. The small edit I'd have would be in line 1027. It's will be the new number 3, where it says the default 25-foot corner radius is required where at least one street is an industrial street. Don't really know what a default required and how those two words work together. I'd suggest deleting default and changing required to acceptable. So it reads. A 25-foot corner radius is acceptable where at least one street is an industrial street.
Yeah.
Okay. Issue 9 is modify target speeds, and we identified a couple places where there were some inconsistencies. And the third one is basically, we think the county's priorities have changed since we completed this document in 2021, and we're recommending a change in one of the street types. So the first one is to designate target speeds for boulevards as 35 miles per hour, as there are no boulevards located in urban areas. And the bill provided a 35 except 25 if it's in an urban area. There are no boulevards in urban areas. The second one was to change.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Leslie, why don't you come up now? This seems like a.
I have a question on that, on the speeds, because over the last couple legislative sessions in Annapolis, we have changed, we've gotten authority to change speeds on different roads. I'm wondering if there's a way to make sure that it's the most, that we don't have to change the code, the county code, every time we get the authority to do that, to change that, the speed. So is there a way to do it in a more, to leave it open, that if we get authority on a, through state legislation, that we can reduce it, just to leave it a little bit more flexible, so we don't have to come back on that? Is there a way to do that, or am I missing something?
I'm not sure. I think that might be a legal question.
And remember, this is target speed as opposed to posted speed limit.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's it, but I maybe having a catch-all in there that would allow us to reduce that speed if we get the legislation to do it, because I think we're always looking to reduce the speed limit in many of our, more urban and even some suburban areas.
These are target speeds, so we can certainly go lower. I think this is really the maximum target speed that we're outlining here. And we actually did set some of these to be pretty ambitious. We'll come to that very shortly, with 20 miles per hour. Now, as before the state legislation had even advanced, we were already looking to establish that on neighborhood streets. I want to say there was another type in there, and we'll come to another very shortly.
Yeah. Second bullet, second issue is town center boulevards. In the bill, they have 2 speeds again. And again, town center boulevards are only in urban areas. So the idea with that one would be 25 instead of 30. And then the third one is that residential streets, with 20 is plenty. The goal is to slow traffic down on neighborhood streets in general. And we firmly believe that neighborhood connectors is one street classification that in the guide and in Bill 2422, it's 25 miles an hour and it should be 20. One of the changes that we made while we were reviewing this is that originally neighborhood connectors included a broader category of streets. And what we're doing in the final guide is and this sort of goes to the minor arterial versus primary residential street. Streets that are minor arterials are going to become area connectors, and streets that were primary residential streets are going to become neighborhood connectors. And it's not uniformly like that. And so the idea is that streets that are now primary residential streets, they should be part of that 20 is plenty campaign and commitment. So that's why we're recommending that change. And
Jerry Sushi, I have a question. I've raised it in the past, but the Clarksburg, what was defined as the 355 bypass, how does that get set in this environment? What speed? Again, it's a bypass for major trucks through a residential area. So that kind of came to my mind.
Well, the bypass.
What do you do with
the bypass?
The 355 bypass.
I believe it would be in the suburban area, and it would be a boulevard, and so the target speed would be 35.
Okay, and my opposition was, or comment was a little bit that it's a residential area. Trucks are going to try to bypass one light on 355 to get up to the industrial area north, but that's something to consider.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll add from DOT's perspective, we agree certainly with the first edit for boulevards. Town center boulevards, we agree, just want to flag that in the guide as approved, town center boulevards are 30 miles per hour. If they're all going to be 25, based on them being in urban areas, then we have to change the guide to revise that down to 25, just adding to our list of markups for that guide. And the 20 miles per hour in neighborhood connectors, we were going to propose the same thing. You just stole our thunder. So, yeah, we support that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, issue 10,
How
sidewalk.
many, how many more do we want to go through?
This is the last major issue, and then we have a bunch of minor issues, which I think we can breeze through most of them. And I know that DOT
Okay,
has some
before you
comments on
leave
it.
speed limits, why don't we hear from Leslie Seville, because some of her rural road stuff touches on speeds.
Okay.
Seems like as good a place as any to.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you. My name is Leslie Seville. I'm a Silver Spring resident. I first want to compliment staff at DOT and here at Planning for this, for the very sensitive amendments. I am supporting the recommendations in the markup in the staff report, pages 4 to 19, getting to the target speeds. The maximum target speed in the document for rustic and exceptional rustic roads is to be done on a case-by-case basis. However, the country road classification has a 20 to 35 mile an hour recommendation for it as a maximum target speed. I'm recommending that that be applied to the rustic and the exceptional rustic roads. Speeding is a serious consideration in the up-county area. It's a real safety concern. And the rustic and exceptional rustic designations are a lower classification than the country classification. So to assure that the rustic and exceptional rustic roads can continue to meet their safety requirements, I think having the lower target speed is recommended. Currently, the speeds are mostly posted between 25 and 35. Talking to the committee, we were able to come up with 3 examples where we think they might be 40 miles an hour. So let's see, the next request is in section 4980, there's a word commission instead of committee for the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, a simple technical correction. Then to reflect the actual Complete Streets Design Guide, Chapter 7 needs to be added to this. That's the Green Streets chapter. There's no reflection in here at the moment. In discussing this with staff, I understand it could end up in a different section of code. But unless it's also reflected in Chapter 49, we could end up with a situation where we have a conflict between 2 sections of code.
I'm sorry, keep going.
And the last one on that is there's also a figure A3 street design features that requires street trees and landscaping and medians where present, which is also not reflected in this document. That needs to be integrated into it, and the DOT design standards also need to be updated to reflect what's in the Complete Streets Design Guide. On the zoning ordinance, Ben very kindly corrected the definition to include exceptional rustic in his list of definitions for roads. And the speed limits and the green streets and trees need to be integrated there as it's added to Chapter 49. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What do you guys think about all that?
Yeah, one thing I might mention, the green streets, which that's a very good comment. Some of the elements of green streets could actually be included in the Chapter 49 ComCore. And maybe you folks can address that a little bit.
If you can share your comments with us, so we'll certainly dive into it. Yeah.
I'm just inclined to say that those sound reasonable. We should kind of defer staff from planning and DOT to see what elements of Ms. Bell's comments can be worked in. What's next?
Next is issue 10, sidewalk
excuse me, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Steve, yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, issue 10 is not a required element in the Complete Streets Design Guide. As DOT also included some changes in Chapter 49, which again is their their guiding regulation to provide some cleanup and clarity. So this is I think a major issue, and we just have a couple of disagreements which are identified above with 4 different bullets. One identifying when a sidewalk exemption, whether it's needed and who makes the determination, clarification on what foreseeable future means, authorizing the planning board to develop criteria for mitigation payments, and then some clarification on section 49-40.
And Commissioner Rubin, the 4th bullet that Steve went over was addressing your comment from earlier about the policies that the planning board has established.
So this essentially would codify those, because I remember when we were looking at those policy questions, I think I raised whether or not we needed to make changes to the road code. So this would actually complete that.
Right, and at that time, this was back in February or March, we indicated we would come back with edits to Chapter 49.
Great.
This doesn't codify that policy, but it says that the
allows
planning
for it.
board can establish.
Right, okay.
Gives
Thank you.
explicit
reasons.
authority.
Yes, thank you.
And I believe we have some.
Interesting.
Jerry,
Go ahead, Jerry.
Jerry, just your comment. We had one case on, as I recall, 7 Locks Road. The issue is an unplatted lot. The issue came up, there was a bike path across the street, but the issue came up of dedicating right-of-way for sidewalk and shoulder on 7 Locks Road. No MCDOT plans to widen that road, and how does that affect unplatted properties, perhaps in more rural areas of the county? To make the required dedication,
Well,
if there's no plan or
if I
not an
may,
issue here. Yeah,
this, I think this just says that we can establish standards for that sort of thing, like
Okay. All
fee
right.
in lieu. I mean,
Okay.
this question, the future is not foreseeable is an interesting epistemic, inquiry, right?
Okay.
But I don't know, the nature of being and knowledge is beyond my pay grade.
all right.
So
Does
maybe,
MCDOT have an opinion on this one, or they're just looking for planning to sign off on what's been presented?
oh, they have opinions.
Yeah.
Here they go.
And this may be one where I think we've been able to achieve a good deal of consensus. This may be one where it might be a little more difficult. But with regard to the first bullet, I think if I understand the notion correctly, is that this isn't, the planning staff is recommending not including it because this is a part of the code that's focused on, the capital improvements program as opposed to developer projects. And I don't know that I agree because I don't know that it says that in either the existing code or the proposed code.
Our understanding of that really was our interpretation of it, and we confirmed it in conversations with Glenn Orland.
I mean, I understand, Glenn has a great deal of history and knowledge. I read the text and nowhere in that section does it say this applies to a project constructed by the county or this applies to a project constructed by a developer.
I mean, that is correct. The last time we, made major changes to Chapter 49 back in 2013, there was a lot of discussion around 4929 and 4923. 4929 was intended to be for capital projects, 4933 for regulatory projects. We did, as Steve said, we confirmed that with Glenn. And one of our minor comments is that we really need to state that in the code because it is not clear.
I mean, that part we agree. that the code is not clear, yes. You know, with the whole foreseeable future, we struggled with that ourselves. We went around, and eventually we decided it was easier just to say foreseeable future.
Yeah, I just think this is part of the, development review process, is that the staffs get together with the applicant and they, I don't think it's helpful to say it's got to be in the CIP or it's got to be, just to say, hey, is this something you guys are planning on building anytime soon?
We're open to any kind of suggestion there.
I think this is just one where it's constructive ambiguity, personally.
Okay, so now the next one, again, I have to this is an existing authority underneath 4940 that is, established where the Department of Permitting Services has this authority. And so we don't concur that it's appropriate to add it here under Chapter 49. And I think to try and understand why does the current code have it here? I think this is when, this is clearly about when a developer is coming in and they're getting through the design process and they're trying to comply with all these other environmental regulations like stormwater management to the maximum extent possible. And they're past the planning board part, but they're trying to pull their permit, and their DPS is authorized to make a determination today to accept a fee in lieu, which then enables DOT to construct some improvement somewhere nearby, but not necessarily require the developer to construct it when it becomes
Yeah, but the
unfeasible.
point is there needs to be some clarity, because I agree the code now seems to suggest DPS can just waive it, and that's just not satisfactory, because DPS can't waive a planning board condition.
Understand
Period.
that, yeah.
So I think we need to clarify that.
Okay.
No matter what the rest of the code says. They can waive it for themselves. They can say, we're not going to require it. But if the planning board required it as a condition of approval, you just got to do it, no matter what DPS thinks, like anything else.
Yeah. Understood.
What's next?
Is that the last one?
That
Yeah.
is the last one.
That is the last one.
All right, certainly, and I think we have some DOT comments on the minor issues, and maybe Andrew and Tim, if you can just identify which ones those are.
I think the first one just was about the clarification. I mean, we've already touched on it about what applies to capital projects or not. I would say 4933, for example, I think does apply to both. It's not necessarily for development projects. It requires DOT to put up a street sign at every intersection. So I think we just wanted to point that out.
I'll take the next couple. I think the third bullet talks about adding the word complete should be in lowercase. Actually, there's two words I think got chopped off the conversion into bill form. It should read, including the regulation adopting the complete streets design guide, where the two missing words there. And that would be a proper noun. The next bullet, where it adds any sidewalk or any side path that is not master planned. I don't know if I consider this a minor edit. This would reduce the exceptions that are being given to sidewalks and side paths, which itself sounds good, building out more sidewalks, side paths. But that means that we have more facilities being built out in more lower density or rural areas where they're unlikely to connect to anything for a long time, potentially decades. The fee in lieu, of course, that if we build those, we have to maintain them. There's also the other impacts of impervious pavement and so forth. But fee in lieu lets us take those resources and put them elsewhere where there is a more imminent need for sidewalks and side paths. So that's why with this in mind, we wouldn't recommend that the fourth bullet be included, because that master plan word expands the scope of that substantially. Let's see, the next several bullets, all acceptable, and I think, Tim, you got one in there?
Yeah, we got one. It goes back again to this whole, I think the same issue we were talking about before with, DPS and what their authority is. I think we've probably already touched on it.
Then I'll take That was the second to last bullet. I'll take the last bullet, which is the protected crossing. We agree adding a definition for protected crossing. We do have a wordsmithing. I've shared it with Steve. Should I read it in full here? Okay.
Yeah, why not?
All right. So our definition would be protected crossing, specific traffic control devices that improve the safety and comfort of pedestrians and bicyclists crossing streets by reducing or eliminating conflicts, as well as increasing stopping and yielding for pedestrians and bicyclists using measures such as traffic signals, in parentheses, full signals but pedestrian signals, pedestrian hybrid, hawk beacons, always stop control, or grade separated crossings. Basically, the goal of what we're trying to do here is protected crossing itself is only those devices specifically to cross pedestrians. That's like the signals and so forth there. Speed management techniques and some of the other stuff I think included in the staff draft. They support those. They're great, but they're not literally the definition for protected crossing.
And I think we are okay, planning staff is okay with that change.
Great.
Yeah, Jerry Sushi, I had a question on that I've raised in the past. Looking at some of the places where one of the cases is Montrose, the old Montrose Road. There are signs that say, stop for pedestrians at the crosswalk versus obviously you hopefully stop for people that are in the crosswalk. Obviously where there's a signal for a crosswalk that certainly tries to make traffic stop. But any review or any changes based on this document where there are unprotected crosswalks defined? I think some of this came up in some of the areas of the county and we are moving to more walking, biking, and safety, so to speak. And so maybe it's a state law that applies more so than local consideration.
Yeah, so it's not quite what was before us today, but in general, Complete Streets tries to lay out a vision for more protected crossings and getting away from those unprotected crossings, whether they're just maybe markings or the ones that don't even have markings. What exactly that constitutes, obviously a protected crossing definition I just read out, leaves a lot of room of what kind of signalization you have or what other sort of indirect features are included. That's something I think we're working to define internally by different contexts, whether it's the speed of vehicles, I think it's the biggest one, size of the roadway, and what exactly we define internally as protected crossing will probably be a little bit more nuanced by a lot of different factors.
And I will mention, when I presented the access management study, I talked about protected crossings. And, in some cases, some protected crossings really just stop traffic so pedestrians and bikes can cross. In other cases, they're a combination. They actually provide some traffic flow function as well. There can be benefits of all of those within this broader category, and the definition works.
I had one other question, and that's routing truck traffic. Back in the day, we had an issue with a quarry on Shady Grove Road. We actually improved the roadway Shady Grove going away from the quarry to 270. The issue came, should we do the other side? I said, no, the trucks are coming back empty. But again, is there any consideration that truck traffic sign says no right turn at the old Route 28, but is there any consideration, and particularly in the Shady Grove area, as we develop that, new plans for development, is any review of truck traffic routing in any of these considerations?
That's not in any of the code updates here. I think we haven't changed the authority we have to respond to that. That's already out there today. I think the only thing that might relate is lane widths. Obviously, we try to shrink down travel lane widths as narrow as possible, pretty much across the board. But there is kind of an asterisk that says if you have a justified reason. Maybe it's a major bus route and buses need a wider width. Or if you've got those trucks carrying dump trucks out of a quarry, that might be a reason where you might allow wider lane widths. But it's really starting narrow, and you have trying to justify why you would go bigger than that.
Okay, all right, but that routing to, as you have more urbanized areas developing, whether that's something that's considered the truck routing through that. You talked about industrial areas before. evolving industrial areas. So that was one consideration at some point to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
Okay.
wrapping up, next steps in conclusion. The next steps, once we get past the county council review process and the approval of the changes to these 3 documents, we would be coming back and revising this document. And there are several different items shown on this slide that we've mentioned. Some of these we've mentioned before, some of these we brought up today. That, it's a running list, as Andrew said, that we would have to go back and make some changes to the guide to conform, and then we would come back to you folks for approval of the revised document.
Okay, very good. Unless there's some objection to that, we will see you soon with the final revisions. And I think we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need your motions to approve comments.
Yeah, okay, can we get a motion to transmit these comments?
So
So-
moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Jerry Sishy, aye.
Opposed? Those are approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.